Oh, hey there. Welcome to the Ope-Eh Three-Way Pro Wrestling Podcast. On this, our 10th episode, fellas. Can you believe it? Double digits, and we made it here. We're all alive in one piece. I mean, I'm sure we're all alive in one piece, right? Donnie Pierce is still with me.
Yeet. Barely.
It's a fine day down here in the Scotty. I'm sure Pierce can attest to. How you faring up there by you there, Donbert?
It's good. It's good. Can't complain out here. It still doesn't feel like it's the fall yet, which is always nice. I'm hoping it sticks around this, yeah, another couple of weeks. I got an outdoorsy trip coming up in a couple of weeks, and it'd be nice if I wasn't freezing my ass off in the rain. So holding out that this
Oh,
sticks
yeah,
around a couple more weeks.
Yeah, I
yeah.
was dealing with that last weekend. I went camping. I didn't expect to be in 80-degree camping weather, and it started raining. Shout out to my day one squad that I went camping with. It's always good to get everybody together.
Hell yeah.
You got them fall colors popping up there by you, Don?
I mean, I live in downtown Toronto, so by fall colors, you mean different shades of concrete? Yes. I don't really know what
Oh.
trees are where I am, but I'm assuming they're around.
Well, your flag, kind of insinuates that, you got a fair bit of foliage around you. So I just figured, I mean, if Toronto had at least one tree, you figured it might be, subject to some climate change here. But
Well, the leaves are
And
I mean,
starting to
then
get
again,
blue again for the hockey season that's coming up.
I
And
was
then
gonna
they
say there was
fall
gonna be
in
one
April
tree,
and May, right? So,
a maple tree.
yeah,
yeah,
it's to
I mean,
commemorate our maple syrup reserves.
go wild. But, I don't mean that literally. I mean that very much in the sports. I mean, it's Minnesota. So, I mean, it's the Midwest in general with sports. Like, you win some, you lose most. So,
Yeah.
but
I mean, us here in Wisconsin, we eat pretty good usually.
yeah, speaking of blue, though, I feel like that's kind of the color of the old testiculars once you get around to postseason there for a lot of cases, though, especially, NL Central, yeah, go Brew Crew, but, they only go so far, and then, oh, time to go home, boys. Maybe next October.
And the
But,
Packers in recent years, it's been like that. I mean, hey, 3 years ago we had the Bucks win, so
Yeah.
hey, how about Malik Willis, though?
who's
Torn
balling
up
out.
in, Tennessee there, hey? Kind of turning out to be a little bit of a Matt Flynn for our Jordan Love there,
Take what you can
He
get.
may have he may have earned
right?
himself a Packers contract for life with that one.
I mean, he
Josh
sure
Allen.
didn't disappoint.
He's no Josh Allen. Come on now. It's my
I
goat.
mean, we can only hope to have so many young studly quarterbacks like one fair Josh Allen.
Or
You know,
Lamar Jackson, my current fantasy quarterback. I'm number one in my league. Fuck all you guys that are in my league. I'm the best.
I mean,
Oh
we're 10 episodes
man.
in. We can just say what we want now, right?
Yeah, at this point, I mean, the
Yeah,
whole show
fuck
is
them
going to
all,
be
says
pretty no
Pierce.
holds barred. So why not just say fuck everyone in your fantasy league and fuck everyone else? Yeah, why not?
I mean, this
Well,
seems the appropriate for him. Yeah.
I mean, speaking of no holds barred, we'll get into that film a little later. And
Oh
because of
gosh.
what we're going on against,
What's that smell?
Oh my god.
because of the stuff that we're going to be talking about, I popped a Zin. I need to be in a. I have to have some kind of nicotine haze to get through some of this depraved shit.
So what Pierce is referring to on tonight's show, we're going to cover the Mr. McMahon documentary that released on Netflix yesterday. We decided as a team we were going to watch the first three episodes of the show and be able to get a initial feed on that. So we're gonna talk about those first three episodes, and we'll cover the next three episodes on next week's show. But we wanted to get in while it was still hot, while all the takes were hot, and give some opinions, say what we liked, what we didn't like, what we learned, what we already knew, all that crap. So yeah, listeners' discretion is advised, I guess, because we're going to be talking about some pretty raunchy shit on this show. So just be mindful of that. Any sort of trigger warnings you might have related to abuse, assaults, rape, any other unfortunate things might be discussed. So please be warned. It is not our intention to make jokes about any of this stuff, but we do want to talk about it as it's relatively current in the IWC landscape. So that's what we're talking about today. Did I cover that one okay, boys? Or
I mean, might would be the operative word you threw in there. We might be discussing this stuff. I mean, you can't really you can't really skip over it. Like, I mean, depraved is a pretty significant understatement. And I mean, I feel like, the farther we get in, and I feel like it seems like, and I mean, because I haven't watched the last half yet, the same as you fellas, but I feel like this is one of those things where they are just kind of, they're giving us a little bit of Vince's human side, but then, especially in the first episode, you kind of get the sense that they're going to stretch that away pretty hard, pretty fast.
yeah,
Like, this is obviously meant to depict, Vince and what he had eventually become in a very particular light, and whether or not you agree with it, I mean, that's to each their own. It's, I guess it's relative, right? We're all human. We each got our own take on it, but it's, it's certainly mired in controversy, and it's not going to be without its fair share of heat. It's going to get hot, brother. Hell's going to be hot.
We'll get into it. But first, as usual on the podcast, shout out our social medias. So hit us up on Facebook, hit us up on X. Brandon and Pierce have been very active on stirring
comments on Facebook,
which I think is excellent. Actually, I think he's been doing a bang up job on those Facebook comments. Get people riled up.
Shucks.
No, that's good. That's good stuff.
Running wild.
Hey, 8 new followers since our last show there, boys, eh?
That's good. Yeah.
The alt show.
I got to fire up the X Wagon the same way, because there's been some. I don't know the kind of people that we're attracting on the old Facebook thing. I don't really use Facebook that much anymore, and I don't know about the type of people that do use Facebook anymore. But it's getting some good conversation going on some different posts. So been killing it there, bringing it into X when we can, and we'll see about other avenues as we go along. But Pierce, if you want to cover the on this day at some point in wrestling history, we'll get ourselves started.
So normally we go way back in time first, but we're going to go only 15 years ago, still a long time at this point. 2009, Ring of Honor, Glory of Honor 8, the final countdown. You probably know who's involved with this match. Bryan Danielson.
Sorry.
There it is. Thank you, Donnie. You can continue if you like for a second.
Oh, background music.
I think that's good.
And I'll have Brandon cue in for the next song.
I'm feeling it.
Nigel McGuinness.
Oh, fucking in the bushes. How's that shit go? We put this festival on, you fucking pigs, or whatever. How it goes. It's Oasis. You know what's crazy? I thought Oasis was all like, fucking Champagne Supernova and like Wonderwall. Yeah, I don't know why I had to think about Wonderwall. It's like, today is going to be the day. And it was the day when I first heard Fucking in the Bushes by Oasis. I'm like, wow, they got a little bit of edge to them, or they had a little bit of edge to them.
They had edge
to them. Now they do with their ticket prices being so crazy. And Liam Gallagher talking shit about it.
Yeah, good on the UK for getting the boys back together, though. Everybody's celebrating over on the other side of the pond over there, I think.
Again, we have to thank Mariah May, because she kissed Nigel McGuinness, and then he came out of retirement, and that song played in Wembley, and then, they came back together.
Yeah.
Crazy how life works, isn't it, fellas?
We're not going to do that. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that.
I mean, I would do that.
You got to believe.
We're not getting into that either. All right. 2009. Let's go. Ring of Honor.
So Bryan Danielson defeated Nigel McGuinness via submission in both men's final ROH match. And until yesterday, both men's final match together, I believe.
Right. 15 years. Holy cow.
I know we're not going too in-depth on yesterday, but Nigel looked fantastic in his first singles match in 12 years, and I'm glad he got his match.
Yeah, I heard it was a great forum for how to do a wrist lock. and how to get, some grappling done. And no, I'm talking shit as usual. But no, I heard I didn't watch it. I heard he had a good performance. I heard it was very technical, which for those types of fans who enjoy that kind of stuff, I could see why they would be a fan of the match. I guess Pierce, you did watch the match, right?
Yeah, I did. I saw parts of it. I mean, Bryan Danielson is probably the greatest technical wrestler of all time, and Nigel, when he was wrestling consistently, was insanely good technically. And him coming back after 12 years wrestling like that and having the match that he's been wanting for those 12 years. Kudos to Nigel, kudos to Bryan.
I'm happy they both got their moment. So, and if it was an entertaining match for the people that were looking forward to it, then that's what matters. So, there's some other stuff that came out of that show that wasn't as exciting, but they got rid of the FTW championship.
It's time.
Yeah.
Yes, I mean that's a good thing out of it. So.
Yeah, I mean, it's a shame they didn't try to take it a little bit more into like the spirit of the title. Like I was saying, I feel like they could have gotten away, especially with the current climate, especially with the performances they've been putting on with like street fights and cage matches and all that other stuff. They could have probably gotten away with having a good like hardcore championship and making that scene a little more relevant in the mainstream portion of wrestling, kind of like how like GCW is still kind of carrying that torch, that CZW and before them ECW left behind. But I mean, then again, too, we're talking like how many singles titles are on that? How many titles in general are under the AEW / Tony Khan umbrella right now? So if there's any one title that had to go that could have gone, and the way it went, I'm not mad at it. Because, like, right, if there's a chance Hook's contract is coming up, and if there's a chance he goes to NXT, then it's probably best that, we got this out of the way now. And it was a good moment, too. It's always good to see father and son moments in general, but particularly between Hook and Taz, kind of tugs at the strings a little bit.
Agree.
Before I jump into the next thing, if Hook does go to NXT, they need to get the rights to that Action Bronson song. Like, that is Hook's entrance theme. You know what I mean?
That's the direction they're heading in. That's what I hear. They want to steer away from, they want to steer towards licensed artists. I know, like, not everything's going to be licensed and, from somebody we all know and love, but if they can, if there's any time that Hook's going to go to another company and get Action Bronson again, it's going to be particularly WWE. It's going to be now.
I mean, I think in cases like that, I don't want to talk shit about Hook, but it needs to be warranted enough to have actual licensed music associated to them. Like, for example, if Daniel Bryan goes back to WWE, if he ever did, like, to have Final Countdown for him would be cool. He's a big enough star that it makes sense to like drop the budget on for it, but I don't know if that's the case for Hook.
In that perspective, in Bryan Danielson versus Daniel Bryan, to me, are two different wrestlers. I know that's dumb because, inherently it's the same person, but like Daniel Bryan is like the ultimate underdog, while Bryan Danielson is the I'm gonna fuck you up guy,
Yeah, I got where you're coming from in that sense, but I mean just from a sheer star power perspective, right? Like, if Lexis King had a licensed song in AEW, like, don't think it's warranted to have him, no offense to Lexis King, but like to give him a licensed song in NXT, for people who might not know who he is, might not care who he is, right? Like, I think you kind of want to have a special feel associated to that, in my opinion, where it's like, if you're going to use licensed music, if you're going to use notable artists for a wrestler's track, they need to live up to that, I think. And I don't know if Hook's there yet.
Well, I feel like WWE being kind of, the land of the second generation sons and all that, the sons and daughters, rather. I mean, it's a family business, right? Like, as we'll talk about later, Vince kind of alluded to it. But I mean, Taz, you can even like, well, maybe not the same way as like some other guys, but I mean, you can kind of tie it back to Taz. And Taz, I feel like, is one of those guys who, looking back, has a generally positive reputation, legacy in WWE, right? He was arguably SmackDown's best color commentator ever. Oh, excuse me. Right, lots of notable moments from ECW. Obviously, one of their most prominent champions ever. Had his awesome Royal Rumble debut match with Kurt Angle that put him on the map. Unfortunately, the map kind of got blurred out and nobody knew where the fuck to go with him after that. But I mean, it was a very, very strong showing, and I don't think there's anything anyone could say against Taz particularly. So I feel like, Hook coming in, this young, promising dude who they can mold up, like maybe they could fit him with some licensed music if he were to earn his way into a main roster spot.
That's where I
Big
was
debut
thinking.
that way.
Yeah,
But
if he gets
I mean,
hot in NXT, I don't think you give it to him in NXT because that already paints him out to be a big deal. And while I know the way that the fan base in AEW perceives Hook, I would challenge that he hasn't done enough to warrant it. I think the gimmick is a good idea, but the ring work and the story and all that stuff, I don't think correlates to that. So that's just my opinion.
that's fair.
But
No, you're entitled to wrong opinions, Donnie. It's okay.
yeah. So you think he's been a mainstay in great storytelling? And that's probably because he was working with Jericho for so long. That's right. Yeah, if he works with Jericho, he must be great because Jericho's great.
Straight out of the mouth of the Canadian. Yep. Must be true.
Let's talk about Jericho in his debut year for WWE because we're going to go back to 1999 real quick.
All right.
Unforgiven 99, taking place in Charlotte, North Carolina. Jericho was on the card. He lost to X-Pac by disqualification, which is a weird sentence. But this pay-per-view is where Triple H regained the WWF Championship that was vacated in a six-pack challenge match. He defeated The Big Show, British Bulldog, Kane, Mankind, and The Rock. So realistically, there was only one other person that was going to win that match.
He beat The Rock.
I think he pinned the British Bulldog, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, well, if it wasn't an elimination match, that makes sense.
But this pay-per-view is really infamous because of one specific match. Al Snow defeated the Big Boss Man, who the man, in the infamous Kennel from Hell.
I do not remember that.
Okay, so you want to talk about bad matches? Here we go. So this storyline was around the Hardcore Championship. Al Snow had a dog. The Big Boss Man killed the dog and fed it to him.
That's horrible.
And then they had a match, which was a steel cage surrounded by a Hell in a Cell that had dogs on the outside, right? And the dogs kept shitting and procreating with each other around the ring and not being like rabid, mean dogs like they need.
Classic Attitude Era. Classic Attitude Era.
Oh, man.
That's the kind of edgy TV we need back, boys. They've been saying it all along.
Oh, that's like a microcosm of what that era was just about.
It's a microcosm of one guy.
Well, I mean, not counting Val Venus, but yeah. Oh, that's fair. Yeah, Vinny Roos.
But like I said, the WWF Championship was vacated, and it was vacated by the all-conquering babyface, Vince McMahon.
Mr. McMahon.
Mr.
McMahon. Come on. We got to differentiate the character from the person. Vince McMahon was not champion.
The person is way worse.
Okay, so we're gonna kick off some discussion on the show just to give some background on this documentary really quick before we get into the specifics of it. This was released on Netflix yesterday, September 25th, for worldwide distribution. It was directed by Chris Smith, who is most known for his work on Tiger King, which was another great documentary on making bad people look like good people. And executive producer was Bill Simmons and Zara Duffy. She was recognized for her contributions to Mission Blue. Lots of starring people in this. Obviously, Vince is the highlight of this, but other prominent figures that were involved were Hulk Hogan, Triple H, Stone Cold Steve Austin, Paul Heyman, Bret the Hitman Hart, Eric Bischoff, Shane McMahon, and Stephanie McMahon, amongst a lot of others. One specifically, I'm sure we'll talk about a fair amount.
A
And
lot of others.
yeah, and then there was a few media personalities brought in as well, from network television to writing, publication, things like that. It's a 6-part documentary. Each episode is about an hour, a little shy of an hour. We watched the first 3 because we did not want to sit there for 6 straight hours and then make all our notes and stuff and then immediately get into this the following day. So we did the first 3. And we'll start it off with the first one. So the first episode was called Junior. And it talked a lot about the early life of Vince McMahon prior to and up to taking over WWE. So who wants to kick us off on how the first episode kind of presented itself?
So I'll take a little bit here. We'll ping off each other like we normally do. Vince said it's not normal for him to talk about himself. Who is Vince seems to be the main question of the entire documentary. And it should be said that all the interviews were before the federal probes, any of the allegations, any of anything that's been out since middle of 2022.
Yeah, this would have been prior to his first resignation in 2022 that they did the vast majority of the filming for this. Not all of it, but the significant portion. The most of the content that you're seeing on the show, the recorded content, was prior to what was that, July 2022 when he resigned?
That is correct.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Carry on.
I mean, I kind of noticed this. You guys thought differently when we were texting about it. I think it's blatantly clear that Vince did not like his father. Him not knowing him till he was 12, and his stepfather, apparently beating him, and there's stories about Vince saying he was sexually abused and physically abused on the daily, he said. It's just, it's not a good home life. And when you finally meet your father and you say you run up to hug him and he just kind of, gives you a, hey, how you doing, pal? Yeah, it's not going to be too healthy of a way to grow up.
Yeah, I don't want to get this into a big deep dive on the cultural implications of that era and how he lived, but like, can't imagine that the trailer park life for him was all that easy at a young age, dealing with all the stuff that he had to. And we don't really know why his father wasn't in the picture. At least it wasn't portrayed in the documentary why his father wasn't in the picture for the first while. But he did talk about his fascination and glamorization of the wrestling industry prior to him saying that when he met his dad. So I think he had the knowledge of what his dad did for wrestling, and he was enamored by it. But so that's where I kind of, I don't know if he hated his dad outright. I think he felt like he maybe had a lot to prove in some multiple dynamics. One, as a business operator to take over his business. 2, as a deserving son, that's like, hey, you didn't pay attention to me my entire upbringing. Like, this is what you missed out on, kind of thing. So I think there's a couple elements there that seem less of him hating him and more of him trying to prove his worth. But none of it was actually outright said, unless you want to listen to Tony Atlas, who outright said he thinks Vince hates his father. So
That was hilarious.
Tony Atlas is going to be brought up a bit on this one, but
he keeps it fucking real.
Yeah, we'll get into some things about Tony Atlas as they present themselves. But Yeah, I'm not convinced that that's the case, but there's nothing really to quantify one way or another whether either of our opinions are correct on that.
I thought it was hilarious talking about that. And Vince had worked, he'd built that whole narrative from the ground up too. And he finally got to that crescendo, that apex where he's like, well, the last thing my father told me before he died was that he loved me. It's one of those things, you know, and you could see him starting to well up a little bit. And he's like tapping his heart with his, you know, his fist or whatever, being like, oh, it's still one of those things you remember. It was one of the greatest days of my life. And then the music kind of just lets there for a bit. And then here comes Tony. I don't think Vince really liked his dad all that much. Just a complete tone shift. And I mean, right. Like, I mean, with Vince, it's hard to say, like, when you talk about, not to do like a full, right, psychological deep dive into it, but right, when you consider, I mean, being brought up as, you know, a man in that era, right? Like, and I mean, and not just the abuse from his, sorry to kind of dive back a little bit, but as alluded to in like his Playboy interview, right? Not just the abuse from his stepfather, but also allegedly from his mother too, which led to
Which was not
kind of
talked
a
about in the
weird,
documentary, but for those that
right?
aren't aware, there's an old article dug up out of Playboy circa mid 90s. I don't know exactly when. It's a very interesting read, and not necessarily in a great way, but it is still a very interesting read. So, but that wasn't talked about at all on any of this backstory. So,
No, but it does. I feel like lend to, if we're, you know, talking about the things that happened in the documentary. Like I feel like pertaining to Vince's experience and how it kind of helped make him what he is or what he became and what these people are describing him as. I feel like you'd be remiss to not include that as well. And I mean, I feel like for the purpose of the documentary, there was certain things they omitted just to not get, you know, because we have Dark Side of the Ring for that too. But I guess back to pertaining specifically to his relationship with his father. Um, right. I mean, just there's a lot of, I feel like when you're Vince McMahon and you come up without an identity and you don't know what it is that you are, you don't know where you came from, you just know that your life is basically like one day to the next, like, oh shit, what's going to happen today? And those are your formative years, you know, day to day abuse, physical, sexual, what have you. And then you discover you're basically, you know, the progeny of this icon, this mogul in an industry, and not even an industry that Vince was particularly enamored with beforehand either. I don't even
it
think he
seemed
was
like
very
he
aware of
was. He seemed like he was.
with
But
pro wrestling prior to meeting his.
I
he
think
was
so.
more on the entertainment side of it. He even admitted he hates the term pro wrestling.
Yes, but he,
Well,
as a kid, I mean, he was still caught up in the larger than life feel associated to the business.
sure, but
Right.
he wasn't a big fan of, I guess, like guys that his dad, like the, you know, like the Bob Backlunds and the Brunos and stuff like that, like guys that kind of shaped that era. Like, right, he wanted to get, you know, the faces, the stars of multiple different parts of the entertainment constellation and bring them all into one, like your Hulk Hogan's, right? Like your, you know, to a lesser degree, like your Jesse Ventura's and like your Captain Lou Albano's, your Macho Man Randy Savage's.
He wanted it to be a variety show, essentially, right? Like, and he had one technically for a bit with
Right.
Tony Atlas said it best. If Vince wasn't in the wrestling business, he wanted to be in the entertainment business. It was very much. Oh, go ahead, Brandon.
No, go ahead. No, finish.
It wasn't. He saw what wrestling could be, and when he took over from his father, you know, and they didn't think he was going to do it with that contract that they had, and he took over. You know, his dad told him like keep the territory separate, and he immediately started poaching talent. And then him poaching talent started to bleed the territories dry, and he started competing and he started putting on shows outside of the New York territory. It showed that he was essentially trying to monopolize wrestling, which for a long time he did.
I don't think that is his intention. I don't think he was intentionally trying to monopolize it. I think he was trying to make it the them the prime. Like his thing was like to just try and go continental, right? He wanted to go from coast to coast. I don't think his goal is like I want to fuck everybody over. I think his goal was just like I want to make as much money as I can out of this and bring this in front of as many eyes as I can. I don't think the initial outlook is or the intention was negative. I think the ends to justify the
Right.
means might have been for the victims associated to it, if you want to call them that. I don't know if that's really fair and just business acumen, but I think what he did was brilliant, and I don't think he was really seeking a monopoly just as much as he was trying to just be the top dog.
Right.
It was hyper competitive.
With doing that, he essentially created a monopoly because the other territories, I think, like 90% of them, he ended up buying out for pennies on the dollar.
Yeah, I mean they couldn't adapt. They would have had time to adapt through that process. Chose not to, couldn't do it, whatever the case may be. Didn't have the right people to do it, or didn't have the right mind to do it.
There's only one
Vince bought them all out.
territory that survived, and then at the end of the day, it didn't even survive. So, I mean, Vince wanted WWF/E to be mainstream, and in the 80s, wrestling is, the story of wrestling is kind of dumb. It's I'm America, and the other guy's like I'm not American. And they're the bad guy, but that's pretty much all it needed to be.
Well, look at how Bret Hart, another great Canadian we're talking about here on this podcast, how he put it, like wrestling is a morality play. It's a depiction of simple goods versus simple evils. And when you follow, like Vince had been doing, the trends of pop culture, which if you look at entertainment in general around that time, look at, right, your Rockies, your half your Arnold Schwarzenegger movies, right? Like most movies, like Indiana Jones, like it's evil foreigners with, nefarious designs against, the all-American, who always comes out on top at the end in spite of all odds. And I mean, that's a microcosm of Vince booking right there. That's been Vince's MO for decades. It had been, I should say.
That's what society was at that time, right? Like you look at historically the different types of media portrayal, propaganda, things like that. Like it was always America versus the evil other guy, right? Like you would see that in politics in the all the way back from the Cold War era, well before Vince through into the 80s and into the 90s, right?
So
yeah, smack dab in the Cold War.
That was the story. And, I'm going to jump ahead a little bit, when they brought Hulk Hogan to be the real American, he was coming off of Rocky 3, it was huge, Iron Sheik was the biggest bad guy that they could get. And it made sense, even though Bob Backlund, good old American boy, it wasn't the American rock star that Vince wanted. He wanted Hulk Hogan, who was larger than life.
American made.
Yeah.
Yep. Backlund was the embodiment of the American boy that Vince Sr. envisioned, whereas Hulk Hogan was the new field, the new era, the new generation, kind of before its time. I mean, Hulkamania was easily the biggest thing that ever happened in pro wrestling. And it just kind of goes to show, like, I mean, had we continued with, if he had emulated his father, right, who's to say what wrestling could have looked like if we didn't have that kind of inspiration as the pinnacle for most all things that kind of were derivative from it, right, in Hulkamania. But I feel like
podcast.
No, we wouldn't. None of us know each other. Well, I might know Brandon, but like,
it's entirely possible.
Me and Donnie would not know each other. You and Donnie would not know each other. It's very much
right.
Donnie would be going to Stampede shows, and we'd be going to whatever the Midwest one was. I know it's the Vern Gagne's.
AWA.
Yeah, we were going to AWA.
Yeah, I mean, we'd be watching what's his nuts, like I don't know, maybe Reed Flair would have still been alive, God rest him.
Even if we were interested at that point, because the way, like, I don't know, I'm talking about our fandom. I can talk about my fandom specifically. Like, accessibility was the interest the reason why I got interested in it. Seeing it on TSN or whatever, and just seeing like these cool characters and stuff. That's what got me into wrestling. Like these small indie independent things that, you know, these regions, these territories, however you want to put it, like if there wasn't any sort of like mass awareness of this stuff, I probably never would have got into it. Like I wouldn't know it existed, and even if I did, I may have thought it was a bit hokey. You know, I mean, it arguably still was when it was on TV, but at least it's glamorized by being on television, right? On being accessible. You can be in the comfort of your own home and take it in on a weekly basis, like you would any other TV show. So I don't know that I would be into wrestling at all if it wasn't for that globalization aspect that Vince took. So
Right, and I think Tony Atlas really said it best in the documentary. It's a dog eat dog world, and you got to get your bite out of it, and that's what Vince did. And you know, it's awesome that he did it, and that he took something that was just New York, Maine, Connecticut, and made it coast to coast. And
Well, it was.
Go ahead.
Oh, I mean, and when you talk about just that area, like, I mean, he didn't create a show, didn't craft a show just for the New England territories either, because that would be very, very apparent. Like to kind of tie things back a little bit to like his depiction of Americana, Vince was making a product, was crafting a product for the entire country. Like, because right, he followed the trends. He paid attention to where media was going, with cable television becoming the next big thing, and nationwide depictions and media spreading. And when we talk about, right, like kind of tying in with what you said that Tony had said about it's being a dog eat dog world, and Vince, some people thinking Vince was predatory in jumping in on the other territories, right? Like I kind of, in a twisted sort of way, I kind of nodded my head and I went, huh. When Vince goes, yeah, this is America. Tough. If you don't like it, if you can't keep up, it's law of the jungle. You either adapt or you die. And it's not like,
man. I don't fault him for any of that.
No.
I mean, and it's business, right? Like it's with anything. You have to adapt. You can't maintain. It's like with anything in life, right? And I'm not going to get Mr. Philosophy here, but you can't be the same in life forever, and especially not in business. You have to be willing and able to see what's ahead of you and to jump on the train and follow the river downstream.
Well,
and that was an analogy that was alluded to also.
There's risks. This guy's taken. I don't want to glamorize. I'm not pro Vince on a lot of things, but I think from the business perspective, I think there's a lot of things that are actually really interesting about his approach. He took a lot of risk in a lot of different areas over the course of his career. And his risk was being the first to do all these things. He was the first to kind of break up the whole territory mold. He was the first to try and do a whole national level event. He was the first to be on TV weekly. He was the first to have a live streaming service for these shows and a digital library for all this stuff, right? Like he was so far ahead on so many things that you kind of like, you're in this era now and you take it for granted, all these things, but like he was ahead of like huge cable shows and huge sporting leagues for all this stuff, right? Like WWE Network was the first ever avenue to consume the on-demand media in sports or entertainment, right? That was before Netflix. That was before anything outside of like pay-per-views and renting stuff from Blockbuster or whatever, right? Like, and like I said, the weekly television, Monday Night Raw is still promoted as the longest, active weekly syndicated television show in the U.S. because it's been going on for so long. So, like, the guy took a lot of risks, but a lot of it made sense because if he didn't do it, someone else would have done it to him. That's how I looked at it, because that's business.
You're 100% right.
Or it would have just fizzled out, and it would have, like you were talking about, like we never would have met each other. This wouldn't have been. We would have been in some weird alternate reality, right? I mean, maybe something like I don't know. Like, what else could you think? Like, I mean, even look at how things were affected by it. Like, look at the UFC as an example. Look at how many more showmen and talkers you have who are likely inspired by pro wrestling, right? Like the Conor McGregors and I mean, he's obviously the most prominent one in my head, but you get the idea, right? Like
Sean
you have,
Strickland is pretty prominent
yeah,
nowadays with what he says,
yeah,
You
right? There's
don't get
other
a Floyd
people.
Mayweather without wrestling.
right.
Yep.
You have and I mean, you could argue too for guys like Muhammad Ali that came before too, but I feel like, well, even Muhammad Ali was getting a piece of the pie, right? Like he was affiliated in a lot of respects with professional wrestling, whether it be in the United States, Japan, elsewhere, right? Because it was a lot of like, I
Muhammad
think,
Ali, he openly said he took a lot of his showmanship from, I believe, Gorgeous George. And
right?
if I can segue a little bit, Muhammad Ali was at WrestleMania 1, and that was probably Vince's biggest gamble with his national expansion, going on closed
Yep.
circuit and having this huge event. And, I thought it was very crazy to hear that Vince and Linda mortgaged their goddamn house to attempt to do this. Which
Well,
let's say, it's weird to see Vince, be human, but it's really weird to hear Linda talk. Um, I didn't even think she would even be a part of this because she's just so, focused on her political career. But her sitting down and speaking is very, very interesting to hear.
well, and personally too, you got to believe she's been so jilted by all of the recent events, and I mean, decades of events, right? And some people argue that marriage in and of itself is a business agreement, and maybe that's what this is to Linda now. Strictly business, but I mean, on a personal level, they had to have loved each other, and like you got to believe there's some part of this that as they're going over this material, it just, it's one of those bitter pills you swallow, but you do it for. Do you want to call it the greater good? I don't even know at this
I
point.
don't think necessarily any of this stuff is for the greater good per se, but I mean, going back to the whole concept of the globalization thing, like this is like Vince literally did the epitome of betting on yourself. Like that gets thrown a lot so much as buzzwords and stuff for people. Oh yeah, I'm I bet on myself. I took this risk, but like this guy literally put his entire life on onto a show, a live production. He's like, if this doesn't work, that's it. I have no house. I have no anything. So,
Linda probably takes the kids. He probably goes back to that trailer park,
yep,
realistically.
yep.
Yeah,
So,
it's crazy. I mean, and to think like, I mean, he did this, and like they always tie it back to his father. And when you go to the relationship he had with his father, like, right. I mean, from coming from an abusive household to jumping into what you can idealize as being like this final father-son moment. And what is the one thing, especially in that era, that a lot of sons are trying to do, and a lot of fathers wish for their sons? It's to supersede their fathers, right? It's to take the legacy, to take the reins of what they're doing, and to put their stamp on the world. And I think Vince's motivation, at least as it pertained to his father, wasn't even necessarily out of a love for his father or even a love for the business, because right, Vince even said with WrestleMania in particular, like, I didn't really do it for, the sake of the business. I don't care about the industry. I care about me. I care about what I'm doing. But he took what his father had and he expanded it, like literally, exponentially. And at the end of it, when he finally gets his father's approval, I think that's kind of, in a way, Vince taking that as acknowledgement that his father is basically admitting defeat. Like, you won, you're better. So you started from nothing. It's like a rags to riches in a literal sense. Like, you start from nothing, you come from this dog shit heap,
started from
you
the
climb out
bottom.
of it, and now he's going to prison.
Oh
But
man.
like I don't want to write off any interest or anything like that. But but I mean, like, I can certainly understand, like, from that perspective, like what it would mean to have your father, right, have that kind of a pride in you, to acknowledge you in that respect, and to acknowledge, like, hey, you bought me out. You're the bigger man here. You're going to take this into the future. I'm proud of you for whatever it means to him. I love you. Um, but yeah, I mean, to that point too, like I could see where a guy like Tony would maybe think, oh, maybe there's not really that much to that relationship, for the fact that Vince was so monetarily driven. He was just so driven by ego and success and fame and just conquering, really.
Right. Him and Linda went on vacation with the kids for a couple of days, and the only thing Vince was thinking about on that vacation wasn't, oh, finally I get to relax. He was thinking about fucking business. That speaks volumes to the person that is Vince McMahon.
You just had so much
If you're
stake in
not,
it. I do that when I'm away. Like on my weekends, I still think about, oh, well, what have I got work coming up for me this week, right? That's supposed to be my time off to like check out. But like when you get so invested into something and your give a shit meter is so high, and obviously it should be for him when all of his equity was tied into it, right? Like I can't say I blame him.
if you're not growing, then you're dying, right?
Yeah.
And that was just such a huge right, like WrestleMania itself. But what Vince was trying to do was just such a larger than life endeavor, and I feel like how do you not take your mind off of something like that? Especially coming from where Vince came from, where there's got to be just a nonstop, a visceral, emotive of just go to work, go to work, go to work, go to work, get out, be better, be better.
But yeah,
Right.
that's a
It's
grind bro
understandable.
style, right? Like he would have grown up around people that had to work minimum wage jobs to go back to the trailer park, right? Like that wasn't a
Just to have
glorious
food on the table.
lifestyle. Yeah.
Hmm.
So I don't know. I don't want to spend too much time on just we got 3 episodes to cover, but I think the documentary as a whole did I don't want to say glamorizing because I don't think that's the right word, but it certainly put him in a more understanding light, I think, as a human being, um, just based on his initial actions as a youth into a young adult taking over the business. It's kind of my interpretation of it. Agree,
Yeah. I mean,
disagree.
it definitely, I mean, it tried to lend a human element to Vince McMahon and kind of let people know, okay, well, maybe you don't condone what he's doing, but at least for the sake of your understanding, this is where
This
he's
is
coming
this is where it came from. Yeah.
from. But you know what the bitch of it all is, and maybe you should have prefaced with this too. But I mean, he being the true to blue carny that he is like, or I shouldn't even say a carny, a businessman. Well, potato potato, right? You
Yeah.
always got to sell something. You got to sell something either way, right? But being like, well, me as a businessman, like I'm not even necessarily what I'm thinking and what I'm saying are two different things. I say one thing, but it's more just to direct like train of thought versus actually communicate with you as a human being. And I'm obviously using my own phrasing in that last bit there, but that's the gist of it.
Yeah.
Where it's like, how much of this is really Vince?
We
I
got into
guess
that in episode 3 a bit more, that elements of it, and we'll talk about that when we get to it. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Like he had a mask on, right? He had a mask on in his interactions with people on a day-to-day basis. And did this really show much of who he was without that mask? I don't really think so. Not really. But Pierce, any thoughts? But I do want to talk about one more thing about episode 1. But did you have any more thoughts on Vince, the early
Uh,
businessman?
Mania 1 was a huge success. It helped him and the WWF, but it did two things. It killed the last bits of the territories, besides WCW, but we'll get more into that. It made wrestling at the time PG. Donnie, what else were you thinking about speaking about for
Hulk
episode 1?
Hogan. Hulk Hogan was a pretty big part of that first episode. He was, the initial bit with Hulk, him getting fired for being in Rocky 3, and then Vince Jr. hiring him back to be the mainstay in WWF. How did you feel about what Hogan said, how he portrayed himself? Because he's in more of the shows, like more of the episodes, but there was a lot on Hogan in the first one.
I didn't think much of it. I mean, I wanted to talk about him versus Sheik when he won the title.
Mm-hmm.
Him attacking Sheik before the bell and then choking him with his robe That's not a baby face move. That's, Sheik's the heel, of course, but like that's a super heel move to start a match,
That's what the fans wanted to see, though. The fans wanted to see the Iranian asshole get beaten down.
Yeah, but you know what Sheik said? Fuck a to Hulk Hogan. Rest in peace, Sheik.
Rest in peace, Sheiky baby.
Hulk Hogan, the original American badass. Well, it's funny too. I liked not to, I'm not going to spiel on about it, but like the tone is set through the first couple episodes in the series as well about the symbiosis between America or between rather Hulk Hogan and Vince McMahon, where if there is no, I mean, you could argue that there would have been a Hulk Hogan without Vince McMahon because of Hogan's work in the AWA that eventually led him to come back to the WWF, but there definitely wouldn't have been a Vince McMahon without a Hulk Hogan, and that much I feel like something that you could argue, but that's my stance on it. Hulk Hogan, between him and Vince, I feel like Hogan certainly had more like innate drawing power. And could he have become huge in the AWA as well? Who's to say, right? Alternate realities. But I feel like when you come to the Vince and Hogan relationship, Hogan was definitely the one who built Vince. Well, it's the brawn to Vince's brain.
I definitely disagree. I mean, Hogan came out himself and said all the good ideas came from Vince. It didn't come from him. And he said the one time he went in for it for himself was on the Arsenio Hall show, and he screwed himself over. That was in a later episode, but like
I never accused Hogan of being the brains,
No, but like he admitted, like all of like the favorable outcomes for him were from Vince's direction. So,
but then you also camp for 4 years for a reason because Vince wouldn't take the title off him.
Sorry, say that again.
He was champ for 4 years because Vince didn't want to take the title off him.
Yes,
he kept it on his golden goose.
Which
he knew what he had.
Yeah. If it's selling, I mean I can't blame him. Wrestling is different now. It's like champion doesn't always sell, but in that case, if it's like just moving merch and putting asses in the seats, like can't say.
I mean, Hulkamania was already developing AWA. He fought Hogan out like right as he was about to take off. So like Vince was on the launch pad. And he just needed Hogan with him with that little extra pressure on to give him that really good trajectory. So that's where my thought was like, I can't say for sure where it would have gone. My thought, because AWA was already a very prominent territory at the time, I don't know how big they were on expanding further, but right, when you consider all that Hulk Hogan brought himself, like could he have risen bigger? Could he have made the company AWA bigger? And maybe if Vince was not able to acquire him, could they have provided some more stiff competition for the WWF at the time? And I mean, I guess, but then you can also question from a lot of other things too, right? Like, I mean, Vince obviously had, higher production values, more money to throw around at the time, a different vision. So it's kind of the same, like, well, like look at a guy like, I don't know, like AJ Styles. You think of like another face of the company who ended up going somewhere else and becoming bigger, or Austin, more specifically, like Stone Cold Steve Austin. Like if Austin had stayed in WCW, he had all the tools there. And if they just kind of let him succeed, what could that have meant for the development of the Attitude Era? It's one of those what ifs that I kind of think about in pro wrestling. Like a lot of Austin's angst, and not to take away too much, but it was derivative of how he was treated in WCW. Like, and then with Hogan, like, obviously Vince treated Hogan right the same way he treated Austin right, eventually. But I don't know. It makes you wonder.
I think Hogan brought a lot of intangibles that Vince didn't have available to him for the people that he had. So don't get me wrong. I'm not saying Hogan did nothing. Vince did everything. I think Hogan brought charisma. I think Hogan brought a mindset to be, go along for the ride and not just rest on your laurels kind of thing. He was ambitious, just like Vince was. And you can see that with some of the outside of wrestling endeavors that he was taking, being in Rocky III, doing some of the other films and media that he had done outside of the wrestling universe. So Hogan definitely brought factors to the table, but from the wrestling perspective, like, the decision maker and the money maker. There's it's hard to interchange those. It's harder to interchange those than it is to interchange, the actors and the actresses. So, it's my opinion, but
Fair.
I don't think. Last thing on episode 1. Again, don't want to spend too much time. I don't think it really told us anything new. I don't feel like it really told us anything that we didn't already know as wrestling fans. I think this might be a common theme across the documentary series as a whole.
Well, there was one thing that kind of popped out to me because they have an episode on Dark Side of the Ring for David Schultz, and it was about the slap on the reporter. Tony Atlas saying, not Vince didn't say, go ahead and slap him, but like, I want somebody to take care of him, and then him celebrating that, that was interesting to hear.
I'm not surprised.
Yeah, me neither. I mean, when you consider all the stories that basically rung true of, we are protective of our industry, we're protective, at least we are then protective of kayfabe and all that other stuff, that doesn't surprise me in the least. And you have an image to uphold too. You got to be the tough guys. You got to be willing to do what it takes as a man to hold down the fort,
But I think the big deal, just my thought there on this documentary ending episode 1, and kind of realize this as we go through, is that for wrestling fans like us, wrestling fans that probably listen to this podcast, 95% of what they watch probably won't be a surprise to them throughout this documentary. There'll be some little tidbits, little pieces like we just talked about that might be new, presented in a different way, communicated from a different perspective, but
I feel realistically we haven't even gotten to the craziest shit that we've seen. The first 3 episodes is going to be a lot of stuff that we know, but I think episode 4, 5, 6, that's where
we'll see. We'll see how it goes. I was not really. I think just the idea of bringing this onto like such a big platform like Netflix, and part of the Netflix machine, if it ends up being a top, I haven't looked in if it's a top 10 yet or not. I'll probably check in this weekend, give it a couple days to cook, but see if it's a top 10 show on Netflix. Then
Well, Dave Meltzer said it was very good, according to him.
Dave Meltzer says a lot of things.
He says a lot of things in episode 2, Heat.
It seems like a good segue as we get into episode 2. We'll jump into that.
Talking about Meltzer.
The episode's called Heat. And it was about that. It was about all the heat around Vince and around WWE. Meltzer, he was a very prominent character that did they even have an introductory thing for, like, I know they had their names, but did it say anything on who he was or anything? Now that I think about it, like, it has their name when they first see them on the TV. I don't recall seeing what they labeled Meltzer as, if they even labeled them at all.
I can't remember, but I would say, Wrestling Observer newsletter editor.
He didn't come across that bad. And I talk a lot of crap about Meltzer, and I will continue to talk a lot of crap because he talks a lot of crap in current era. I don't think he came across that bad. He came across somewhat knowledgeable. He spoke normally-ish, and he cleaned his fucking office. So,
yeah,
keeping tabs over there, hey, Donnie.
Oh my god,
that shit at Dark Side looks
looking behind the Melts man for all sorts of incriminating.
That's the first thing I looked at, was to see how clean his office was, because it's always such a meme with him. I didn't care about what he's talking about for the most part because it's like fucking Dave Meltzer, right? But like, he cleaned up his office. It looked good.
Yeah, I mean, when you're putting something on Netflix, you gotta look like you can hang, gotta look like you belong. One thing I thought that was interesting about Meltzer, just kind of as a slight segue, that I think of something he mentioned. I'm trying to remember which episode it was, but he actually, I think, acknowledged the fact that your larger than life characters actually do matter more than your in-ring work. And I don't remember, I wish I could remember exactly what Spotty had said that in or alluded to it, but it was, I heard it, I was like, wow, it's one of those things where you remember how it made you feel. And for Meltzer you talk about Meltzer in this day and age, and especially like his little, what do you want to call it? Fascination, obsession with, your Will Ospreays and your Will Ospreays. But
Your Will Ospreays and your Will
yeah,
Ospreay, Kenny Omegas.
yeah, Kenny Omegas. Can't forget Kenny Omega. Um, but just to hear him be like, oh yeah. Well, I mean, Meltzer's from that industry too. He's from that time, so it's like, being around all that and seeing how it all worked out and seeing where it led to, like you can't not acknowledge it.
Yeah, I
You'd
think it's a
be
load of crap coming from him though. Like he says, like it's all about the feel and the presentation and the gravitas and all that crap. And then you see his star rankings and his criticism towards these matches that have that level of showmanship to them, and he shits on them for different reasons, right? Like look at the review he gave for Rock and Hogan. Look at the review he gave for Cody and Roman at 41. He didn't talk
yeah.
about the energy and the
Or
atmosphere at all, and those are two of the biggest moments in
you wanna
WrestleMania
talk his
history.
ratings? WrestleMania 3, Hogan Andre, he gave -4 stars when that was the reason that they drew 93,000 people, even though it was,
I don't even want to.
probably
I
closer
don't
to
even
their
want to
real.
humor that discussion about the attendance because it's typical Meltzer bullshit. I'm sure
I
Brandon
mean,
Thurston was licking his chops the whole time. Oh, it's definitely this number, and screw Vince, and gonna ask
it,
more
it
interview questions about whether people are rapists to Cody Rhodes.
there
Oh,
there you could see the
geeks.
wide shots that there are open seats in the nosebleeds. It wasn't a packed sellout. They can say it was, but it's not true.
Yeah, well,
Um,
my point is, I think he's full of shit when it comes to saying that the show is bigger because there's a lot of evidence that shows he does not believe in that.
no, right now he likes flips over fists.
Anyways,
Um,
enough about Meltzer.
but to segue more into the beginning of it, uh, if Bret Hart is saying that the boys need a break, the boys need a break. That dude was saying 7 days a week, 52 days a year. That there's no day off.
Yeah.
And Jesse Ventura trying to unionize because he saw how SAG was doing it, and he has a SAG after card now.
Yeah.
He has a very, very good interview with Chris Van Vliet. If you guys haven't seen it, highly recommend that. Um, he tried to help the boys, and Hulk Hogan fucking stooged him and got him fired.
So I get why Hogan did what he did. I don't condone it. I think it's a really shitty thing to
Because he
do.
would have lost money doing it. It's
Yeah.
literally
Like he would
him
have lost his
losing money.
career. Well,
Union
like I mean, you
busting as
talk
a whole is
about.
pretty lousy, especially in that industry. But
Well, I mean, it was still very Carney derivative, like, I mean, and right, like you said, like if Bret Hart, the guy who came out of Stu's dungeon for all the legendary stories that are told about that place, is saying, like, we're going too far, like maybe that's something you should listen to. Because right, I mean, I can't imagine, like, it's already hard enough for anybody when you're working, 7 days a week or however many hours you're putting in. But like to be on the road and to just be like beating yourself up 7 days a week, no healthcare, no sort of provision outside of what you're doing, no development of skill sets that could take you into other avenues of your profession, right? Like maybe as an announcer, maybe they could go the Ventura route or something like that, or the Bobby the Brain or whomever. But but man, like, I mean, it was really like the Wild West back then. And just, you think of like, oh, like, and it's no wonder that that culture kind of manifested the way that it did. I mean, for better and for worse. Just you get obviously like your Hulk Hogan's and your larger than life stars who are legitimately like superheroes. Because right, you see them every week and they're doing this crazy stuff, and you don't necessarily take it into account at the time. But I mean, they're crazy. They're beating the hell out of each other. They're doing shit that's like pretty much superhuman by almost any other standard. But at the same time, like, I mean, what does beating yourself up like that day in, day out incessantly do to you mentally, you know?
I'm genuinely
And then he's,
surprised that professional wrestling isn't unionized at this point. Like even like to this day, with modern education, modern knowledge, that kind of stuff. Like I'm kind of surprised that current WWE wrestlers aren't unionized.
Well, now they're getting the chance, and thank you Triple H for this. That they could just be I think CM Punk said, they have an app for the wrestlers. You could just put in days off, and then it'll just get approved. And
Yeah.
it is mind boggling. But Jesse Ventura was the only one that spoke out about it, and hats off to Sexual Tyrannosaurus for that. Jesse Ventura, I think, is one of the smartest minds to ever come from wrestling, and I think we're very lucky that he, with so many people from the 80s, 70s dying so young, we're lucky to still have Ventura with us. And, a big part of the reason that people from 70s, 80s died is because of Zahorian, with them, giving out steroids and pain pills just because, I need this, but I also need this. And then he would just do it. And I mean, I'm pretty sure Zahorian went to prison, and
He did.
rightfully so. Realistically, I think if you want a better version of the steroid trial, the Dark Side of the Ring really gets into it quite a bit. That episode is fantastic. I mean, most episodes of Dark Side of the Ring are fantastic, but that episode goes way more in depth than this documentary does. And I mean, it's crazy that people couldn't get a break, because if they got a break, they lose their spot and then they'd just be out of a job.
Well, think of the paranoia that seeds too. It's bad enough that these people are already probably coming from, very similar situations to Vince. Like you hear a lot about, a lot of pro wrestlers didn't come from your nuclear family, like Leave It to Beaver type environments. Like a lot of them came from dodgy bullshit, and it's unfortunate for them. But when you look at the appeal of pro wrestling, especially in those times where you can become a literal superhero, everything else be damned, your physical health, your mental health, as long as you get that legacy, as long as you get that statue, that's worth it for a lot of people. And to what end, right? I mean, you look at, Jimmy Snuka as the perfect example when they talk about his popularity, but when you contrast it with just the tragedy that his life created, and then things that befell with the Warrior and things that befell with, like Lex Luger and Elizabeth and all of that whole gamut, man. Like I'm just so glad that like pro wrestling is just in such a better place, and it's steered away from that. And they actually give a shit about the people who work for them now, and they're attentive to the fact that these people, like, they have lives outside of wrestling and they have personalities outside of their characters. Because that's a thing too. Like, for better or worse, kayfabe is dead in the sense that it's better. Like, these people, and Undertaker, they focused on him as a prime example, but they defended these characters like tooth and nail. Like, they were these people, and to have that kind of a dissociation can't be good for you either. I mean, it's one thing to pretend like you're a character, like from a movie or whatever, if you go into appearances, but like, if you can't even go out in public without being somebody else, and to such an extreme too, because it's always, it's elements of these people dialed up to 11, right? When you're like that all the time, like it's got to create some very, very unhealthy neurological pathways.
Yeah, I
But
agree with all that, and probably gets you into a lot of bad habits, as we know, which led to
yep,
a lot of early demises. So I
yeah,
definitely agree with all of that. So that was like the first part. It talked about WrestleMania 2,
Which
which,
is a bad idea.
yeah, it was really ambitious. I think it was one of the
it
few
was
cases where he was a
interesting.
bit too ambitious. I didn't know that actually that was the case with WrestleMania 2.
It, that
But
was such a bad idea.
it was such a what?
Every
Sorry.
arena it's such a bad idea, because every arena had 4 or 5 matches, right? And then your fourth match is done, and then you just be watching a small screen on closed circuit.
Yeah.
And I think the New York crowd, it was New York or Chicago, had it worse, because then they had like a bad tag match, a bad tag match, a bad women's match, and then Roddy Piper versus Mr. T in a boxing match.
Yeah, it was all over the place, literally. So you're saying you don't think they could get away with doing a WrestleMania 2 type of show these days, where they want to show the widespread, like, could you imagine like if they tried to run simultaneous shows like in Asia, Europe, America, kind of
It's
communicating.
a
I feel
bad
like that was the
idea.
message they're putting forth.
They tried it again for Raw 25 or whatever. They had the simulcast where they had one at Barclays and one at that weird smaller arena where the first Raw was, and they had Jerry the King Lawler and JR there, and JR fucking fell asleep on commentary.
Oh yeah, I do recall that.
It was bad back in 86, and it's bad now. Mania 3 though was one of Vince's best ideas. Andre versus Hulk, they lied about it being the first time ever because it happened in the WWF before, but I
Get away
mean,
with it.
it's saying Andre had never been slammed before, another lie. Hulk Hogan slammed Andre in the WWF before.
Well, I mean, and multiple guys slammed Andre outside of WWF.
Right.
Not exclusive to Hogan even.
But like Andre the Giant versus Hulk Hogan is realistically the first like super match. You know what I mean? WrestleMania 3 has one of the best wrestling matches ever on it, and then it has one of the original, every WWE broadcast to this day still starts with Hulk Hogan slamming Andre. And it's the biggest moment possibly of wrestling history, and rightfully so. They built it up incredibly well, and it paid off. And I mean, how do you follow that up but with no holds barred?
Yeah.
Just keep a train going. I don't even want to talk about that. Keep it going. Talk about no holds barred really quick.
So I mean, it said that Vince worked nonstop, and I think that was still a point till he absolutely had to. He was forced out of the company. Them saying it was written by Vince and Hogan explains a lot. And
what is it first for people who didn't watch it and don't know? Sorry.
It's a movie that's bad.
Apt.
There's one good moment in it where a guy shits his pants, and that's it.
It was so. I've never watched it, and when I saw that clip of them bringing it up in the doc, I was like, "This shit sucks."
And you saw the movie was great. Also explains a lot.
I mean, I feel like it's a warranted reaction if you see like a Hulk Hogan springing up, from behind some vehicles in a parking garage and yanking you out of your vehicle. I feel like it was warranted. I was surprised at the volume of Duke. I never actually really watched No Holds Barred. I knew about the scene, but I was very kind of taken aback at just the volume of Dookie that there was. Like they went really all out with that production, man. Like it was something. Sorry, but I don't mean to. I digress.
I'll give you one guess on who wrote that line.
The what's that smell line?
The
Dookie?
Entire scene.
Dookie! I'd wager Vince. Or Shane. Was it Shane?
No, it had to be Vince.
Could have been Bruce Pritchard.
I mean, he's so far up Vince's ass, it's possible.
Trying to figure which one of Vince's stooges was the one with the scat fetish. But I mean, really, you could kind of close your eyes and throw a dart. You'll probably hit one of them.
Oh man.
Anywho,
so you talk about WrestleMania 2, WrestleMania 3, but the majority of this episode was covering all the different scandals, all the heat that Vince and WWF had attracted at that point, and it brought in a couple people, specifically Phil Mushnick, who was a sports columnist in the New York Post, who they talked about. Nobody really talked about wrestling in mainstream media. It was kind of in its own little universe until Phil started writing about it. And we don't really know. Again, like Phil basically says he did it because nobody did it and he wanted to start doing it. Vince thought there was some huge vendetta. But it basically resulted in dredging up a lot of dark stories.
Right.
So
I never heard of Phil Mushnick before this documentary, but
So
I mean,
I had to struggle where I heard that name before because there was a name that I heard before, but I never really put two and two together. But when you think back to the promo that Paul Heyman had cut on Vince McMahon in the middle of the Invasion storyline, where Paul Heyman was basically digging up all the old bones on Vince about, he's like, I don't care what you did to Jim Crockett or, Vern Gagne or Phil Mushnick. And that's where I'm like, where have I heard that name before? And that was the last time I had heard it. And he's talking about all these people who Vince had notoriously screwed in the past in order to maintain his empire, and just those old enemies. And that's where I was like, like that's very, very interesting. But I mean, continue. But yeah, it's just interesting to kind of have that tie back and just to see how much Phil Mushnick really meant to Vince.
Yeah. So that brought up the Rita Chatterton claims that materialized back in that would have been the late 80s, correct?
it was 86.
Yeah, mid to late 80s.
Yep.
Yeah.
I mean,
then there was also the segment where my names are, I don't actually have a couple of these names written down, but the reporter got hit backstage. The chokehold that Hogan did on live TV, that was also brought up. And a couple other spots too. But
so one of the first things they said about Heat was they were talking about Mania 6 and Mania 7. Mania 6, in your backyard, Donnie, was the perfect passing of the torch. And then Mania 7, they thought they could get 100,000 people to come out for Hulk Hogan versus Sergeant Slaughter.
Yeah.
That's a joke. That would have never happened in a million years. They can blame Desert Storm all they want, but nobody was going to come out for that match.
Agree.
But
It's funny.
oh, go ahead, Brendan.
No, it's funny because like when I was first starting to watch wrestling, I had no idea that Sergeant Slaughter was ever a WWF champion. I thought, because like I started playing video games and like in WWF Attitude for the N64, right? Various other platforms, but for that one particularly, I remember Slaughter, kind of being a commissioner character, like he was a stooge, like Jerry Briscoe or Pat Patterson, like nothing much like that. But like when you look back in history, you're like, holy fuck, he had a WrestleMania main event with Hulk Hogan. Like it kind of put it back.
You reminded me with that comment. Sorry about talking about the controversies and not bringing up Pat Patterson and the Ring Boy stuff. Oh boy.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. That was this episode, I believe.
It
yeah.
was. That's why I.
Fucking terrible. That
Mel
Terry
Phillips,
Garvin got caught and they fired him, but Pat Patterson just got to stay. And Tony Atlas, keeping it real again, saying that dude came up and would just grab their junk, blatant sexual harassment, and ring boys, young boys harassing people, and then Tony Atlas saying they couldn't say anything because you'd take it or you'd go home. That's so fucking terrible.
Pat Patterson is still glamorized to this day in WWE. Like they're still under the operation that he's done nothing wrong. Like if I go on their Twitter account,
had Meltzer talked about that though? Because I think Meltzer mentioned like someone came up and's like, of the three guys who they're getting rid of for this, there's only one that's innocent, and it ended up apparently being Pat. But because Pat was gay, they profiled him based on that, and they're like, well, in order just to let the heat die down, in order for this not to elicit any more controversy or whatever, then they let him go. They brought him back, after the heat did die.
Terry Garvin was a homosexual man. So
which is curious then. So I'm wondering, I don't know if Pat was just more open about it, or, I mean, I haven't delved that much into that particular issue to kind of speak intelligently on that, but the way that it was kind of portrayed in the documentary made it seem like, well, he's going to be kind of a lightning rod for a lot of negative controversy because they're going to come up and ask him questions in the media, and like, as long as he's employed by the company, like they're going to attract all this negative attention. So like we got to save our own asses and fire a gay man because, gay people are all pedophiles, right? At least according to 1980s logic. I don't know.
They still do birthday tweets for him every year. So
And
For Pat.
I think
for Pat,
think
yeah.
two reasons for that is that, even though they could do it with Benoit, and now they're doing it more with Vince, they need to erase him from history. He was the first Intercontinental Champion, and he created the Royal Rumbles. So I think they're going to keep saying, Pat's around, but they need to wipe Pat from history.
Well, we'll see
because
January 19th, 2025, how they acknowledge it with a direct accusation. So slightly
um,
curious about that.
and speaking of accusations and whatnot, to leave a shout out to what Vince said about that was one of the most disgusting things I've ever heard in my life.
Oh,
And
no, that was
I'm gonna read
regarding
the
Rita.
quote. I'm gonna read the quote.
Yeah.
This is really where the viewer discretion is advised, because this is legitimately like stomach churning. What Vince said about it is that it was a consensual relationship, but had it been a rape, the statute of limitations has ran out. And uh, yeah, that's disgusting. And with everything that's come out with Vince, he deserves to rot, especially after a comment like that.
And if I may say too, like for those of you who don't know, because admittedly I didn't know and I had to look it up, but like in liturgical terms, the statute of limitations is basically like you can't accuse somebody of a crime if it's been too long from the point of accusation. So, like for instance,
It's
like in the
7
state of
years, right?
Wisconsin, I don't know. I don't know if you knew this, Pierce, but like I looked it up and pertaining to sexual assault, if you're saying something happened to you 6 years ago, there's not really grounds for you to stand on as far as litigation goes because it's outside of the statute of limitations in our state. So just one example, of how that pertains to our world. And like when you look at Vince's mentality of like him just, skirting past what could have been, another hellstorm for him and just looking at it and being like, oh yeah, like I might have done that. I might not have done that. But even if I did do it, who the fuck cares? It's very OJ Simpson-esque. And you know what I mean? Like you go out and you write a book about it.
Yeah, it's fucking
And
if I did it.
it's despicable. Right, exactly. It's just it's that statement in a nutshell is an if I did it. And it's despicable. You're absolutely right. And it just really goes to show his mentality and like just the sheer narcissism that the man, he portrayed and embodied. He didn't give a fuck who he buried. He didn't give a fuck who got hurt as long as as long as he got to where he needed to go, as long as he could put one foot in front of the other, who cares if he got a little muddy or a little, fire and brimstone-y, like.
And you wanna talk about that? There were three things with the narcissism that came out. Vince coming out and saying WWF is drug free. That's a joke. Vince has been on gear for like 40 years. Vince telling Hulk Hogan he needs to tell the truth, which is Vince telling people you need to be honest, and then Vince calling other people bullies. Like everything that we knew about Vince as a person was that the dude lies. He definitely does steroids. You aren't 79 and looking like that without steroids. And Vince was a bully.
Yep. Agree with all that.
Yeah, man,
That's all I
Tony
got
keeping
on
it.
this. So
I mean, Tony again keeping it real, being like, yeah, we. Speaking of, the way you treat people, the way Vince treated people, it wasn't exclusive to Vince either. Like Tony Ellis came out and said, he's like, yeah, we all use women like toys. Like they were like that was all they were, and like, and it just really is a testament to hear Tony say that about his time, and then to fast forward 40 years and to see just like how far women's wrestling and just treatment of women in the entertainment industry. I mean, within the entertainment industry, you could argue there's a lot more that still needs to be done, right? But I mean, within professional wrestling, it would appear at least that there is it's night and day, right? Like the women are perceived, you know, with at least how they're written as characters, at least like with what they're willing to invest in the women wrestlers, like they're a lot closer to the men than they ever have been, by bar none. You know, when you have, I mean, if you could imagine someone like a Rhea Ripley or like a Charlotte Flair or like a Mercedes Moné, like back in the 80s, right? Like even in the era of like Wendy Richter, when you still had those names that were still huge, but they were getting, you know, screwed left and right, literally figuratively by everyone around them. And even by the other women, even like, I mean, not to tangent on Moolah, but, you know, talking about Richter and that depiction, you know, and that's more like an episode 3 thing, not to get too ahead. But I mean, when you talk about, again, just the status of women in wrestling and how far that's come compared to just being toys for the boys, you know, it's really great to see, but then it's also very harrowing to see that like a lot of what the foundation was for the stuff that we love came from that, you know.
Yep. I mean, keep talking about him on the show. I do want to make a bit of a crack at him just because I saw it on social media the last couple of days. Tony Atlas, you talk about keeping it real. Don't go on his social media if you want to know about him keeping it real. Oh my God. Have you guys seen?
Well, now I want to go on it.
Oh God.
Not yet.
He has a very in your face fetish interest that he's into, and it's
Oh,
not,
he's the one.
yeah, it's not NSFW, but it's definitely very out there. So if you decide you want to
No,
look into Tony Atlas a little bit more, you might not want to do
damn
it
it.
on your work
No, I
computer.
gotta.
But
You might want to do it in the middle of a podcast that you're filming, though, or you're recording for, for
I just
everybody
remembered it
listening.
from my time. But if you guys want to, here,
Good
hold on. Let
Jesus.
me.
Oh,
Right.
here it comes, boys. The real
Oh,
page of
God.
Mr. USA Tony Atlas. His wife is 83. Damn. Okay. Yeah, I'm not going far
I'm gonna
enough back
actually
here.
send you guys one of the.
Oh no, I'm looking at them.
Oh, no. Oh,
That's a good footnote for the podcast, boys.
yeah.
Keeping it real,
Yeah.
boys. That's what he does.
Yeah, you could argue that the sole purpose of this segment is to expose Tony Atlas as a very a surprisingly
Hey!
common
Don't put your
man.
foot in your mouth right now, okay?
Yeah,
Sorry, I had to
You
throw
yeah.
that
talk
one in
about
I'm
there.
Richter. I think maybe we need to move
wear
on to this episode
yeah.
3.
I'll just wear bags over my feet whenever I meet Tony. It'll be fine.
Oh
If I
man.
ever run through him at a signing.
Holy shit!
Sorry, guys. I had to do that to you.
No,
Uh,
that was incredible. Thank you for that.
and I don't want to say I've seen worse because I'm not. This isn't the podcast for that, but it's. I could have done without that today. We'll say that.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Hopefully, it doesn't
Oh,
screw up your algorithms on your search history.
Oh, I went off the Ope-Eh Twitter, so it's screwing us all up.
Oh man. The last part of episode 2. Again, in the interest of time here, but that was the start of the drug scandal case that we'd already talked about a little bit, but the actual trial associated to Vince and WWE about distribution of anabolic steroids to their athletes, and Hulk Hogan also moving to WCW despite telling Vince he was retired and never going to compete with anybody else again. So, any final thoughts on the wrap up of episode 2? Comments on those last couple parts?
if I was Hogan, I'd have done it too. It's like the Roman Reigns contract, right? Like you look at, well, how the hell is a guy like Roman Reigns only going to make so many appearances a year? But it's like if you're guaranteed money and the days you're working are chopped in a tenth, right? Like who's going to say no to that? Personal feelings aside, like you do what's best for you, and you say that to anybody with any kind of job. Like you do what puts money in your bank, you do what puts bread on your table. If I'm Hogan, like that would have been the easiest call to make,
Don't hate the
especially
player, hate the
considering
game.
like they were willing to give him that chance after
And
that scandal.
Can't forget the creative control in his contract.
No, right? I mean, hey, would you have shied away from that?
Oh God, no.
Nope.
Right. What I'm saying. Can't blame the man.
I don't. I really don't. It led to some good stuff in professional wrestling. It led to some real bad stuff in professional wrestling, but um,
True.
that's more into episode 3. Um, yeah, I think this episode did a bit better. I don't want to say vilifying him, but definitely showing some of the sketchy shit that Vince
No,
had
Vince
done.
vilified himself with what he said.
Yeah, that one line was pretty shocking. It was pretty bad.
Just a flagrant disregard of the situation too.
I mean, he said it
Just
on camera. Like, there's something that comes up in episode 3 that I don't know if you guys noticed it. I'll point it out when we get to it. That was like a little bit suspicious, but
So I did mention to you guys I hit a wall last night, so I missed the last like 20 minutes of the show for episode 3.
you should
Um,
make sure you go back to watch it.
yep, that's my plan for tonight after the pod, and then
Yeah.
we'll discuss from there. And maybe in the next episode I'll give a small excerpt of my thoughts from that. With what episode 3 was about, I thought it's been talked about to death, so maybe I could wing it from there.
Yeah.
We'll
I
see what
mean,
happens.
I think going into episode 3, it started off with what happened with Wendy Richter getting the title taken off of her.
Which
Um,
I do want to say, what Vince was saying is bullshit. It wasn't about her holding the title and needing to drop it. She was one of the biggest stars of the Rock and Wrestling Connection, and it was about Wendy Richter. And Dark Side of the Ring in the Moolah episode talks about this. She wanted a fair wage because she was just as big a part of the Rock and Wrestling Connection as Hulk Hogan. She didn't want to get paid as much as Hulk, but she was getting paid way, way less for being one of the biggest stars. Like, they wouldn't have gotten what's her name?
Cyndi
Uh,
Lauper.
Cyndi Lauper. They picked Cyndi Lauper to be with her. They wouldn't have gotten Cyndi Lauper without Lou Albano and Wendy Richter. And it was her wanting to be paid a fair wage. And nope, Vince did not care. This is business, and there's nothing I wouldn't do for this business. So who did they get to take the title off her? Fabulous Moolah, who has her own skeletons in the closet.
Ugh.
But
Yeah, beautiful twist of irony. Basically, female Vince, really. Like, I mean, when you look at, and Dark Side of the Ring is one to watch in that regard too. But just again, when you look at how far women's wrestling has come from that era, and it's bad when the men are doing shit to you, but when you got women, who you think could associate with you on that level, like that are effectively pimping you out and using your profession as sort of like a guise for all this horribly shady shit that's going on in order to advance your machinations, in order to like fill your pockets, like that's just downright fucking despicable. And it's crazy that they portrayed Moolah in such a positive light for all those years. And it's crazy how fast that all switched around as soon as it became more public of what she had done. She had a battle royal named after her at
as
WrestleMania,
soon as
right?
that battle royal was named after her for like 2 hours.
Right. And then all of a sudden they were going to make it the counterpart to the Andre, and all of a sudden it comes out. It's like, can't do that no more.
Because you said it correctly. She was pimping women out, and she ruled women's wrestling with an iron fist. And the shit that she did was fucking gross and terrible. And she, to her point, to be fair, was one of the biggest women's wrestling stars in history. You cannot argue that fact. But what she did to the women that were looking for tutelage and were looking for help is fucking terrible, and she should not be celebrated.
Agree. Agree with that.
It's crazy though, because you think of all the records they could erase, right? Like they can erase Vince being the oldest WWE champion, and I hope they do that in the next coming years, right? Because they got like a lot of guys who they could run like R-Truth. I've said it many times. I want R-Truth to be the guy to win the championship in a couple of years. I don't care how he does it. Just scrub him from the books, put it on someone who is more than deserving, who's been, a standard bearer through and through for the industry. But when you look at record like Mula's, right, like you have to look at Bianca Belair as like the longest reigning champion of the modern era because nobody's going to ever touch like 30 years ever again. Nothing's going to even come close. You're never going to see a double digits women's title reign, I don't think, ever in this era or in subsequent eras. Like it's the same thing with San Martino, right? Like no one's going to even touch his 7-year reign or whatever, however long he had that. So it's just unfortunate that you're going to have in some, like you can't talk about pro wrestling history without unfortunately talking about Moolah. And then unfortunately you have to associate her with the longest women's title reign of all time. But then there's obviously like surrounded by 5 asterisks on either side. So that's all I had to say about that.
Yep. So after that segment, it went into the end of the trial where Hogan infamously defended Vince and said that Vince didn't ask him to take steroids. Vince wasn't providing him any steroids. Vince wasn't expecting other people to take any steroids. And I thought that part was pretty interesting in the sense that it's similar to what you were talking about with the reporter that got smacked in the head. How it's like, oh man, really wish something happened to that guy, and then something happened to that guy. It's the same thing in the steroids sense, where it's like he alludes to or just shows favor for people who pretty evidently were on steroids, but allegedly. And I mean, if Brett says it, I would probably believe Brett. He tends to be the most brutally honest about most things here of anybody, I think, in the documentary. Him and
it was the
Tony.
same for the WCW documentary. If you never watched that one's a great watch. The Who Killed WCW. Brett, everybody's like, oh, I didn't do this, and Brett came in, he's like, you are all a bunch of fucking idiots.
Yeah, but Brett said he was never, propositioned for steroids by Vince. He was never asked. He was never provided. So I don't know if that's a case of not wanting to implicate himself or what, but he says he didn't do it.
Brett ever did steroids. Even to this day, he looks very similar to the the physique he had in the 90s and in the 80s. I think Bret Hart, even though I wasn't watching him, is one of the greatest pure pro wrestlers of all time. And I love just him being his own biggest fan in anything he's in.
He's an artist. He's an artist.
He is an artist. If you watch him, he was an artist.
I love how obviously I'm Canadian. I'm supposed to like Bret. I did like Bret as a performer.
He's one of my top 2 favorite Canadians, or top 3. There's 2 above him.
I'm one of them, right?
No, you're like number 7. No, of course, it's you and Martin.
No, but what I was saying was he definitely comes across as though his shit doesn't stink. And I think that was kind of like emphasized almost a little bit in the documentary. And then they have the clip immediately after where Vince is like, "Oh, you show a lot of humility, Brett." And I thought there was a little bit of a, humoristic moment to that in the sense of like he's going on about how he's an artist and how he didn't even say his typical line of the best there is, the best there was, and the best there ever will be, but he put himself out there that way, and then he was immediately called very humble, which I thought that was kind of funny. But
I mean, younger Bret Hart was probably humble. Nowadays, Bret's a little bit. He sniffs his own farts.
Yeah, I mean, he's got some reasons to be bitter.
Bret Hart.
You're Bret fucking Hart.
I don't fault him for some of the reasons that he's bitter too. Shout out Bill Goldberg.
Shout out Gunther for shouting out Bill Goldberg the other week.
That was fucking great. Just so unabashedly trolling him.
Oh
And
man.
Brett loves that shit though too. Like he got a rise out of when I remember in like the first episode of Dynamite when like MJF cracked down about when that fan jumped him at the Hall of Fame or whatever, and Brett just in the ring just kind of smiling like, yeah,
Yeah, that
yeah,
happened. Yeah.
getting ribbed, yeah. Yeah, he knows how to take a good joke, I feel. He
Yeah, I
seems
think
like a
so.
good guy to get a beer with.
Yeah.
I'd get a beer with Bret Hart.
I'd pay money to get a beer with Bret Hart.
Yeah, me too. I'd buy Brett a beer.
Oh yeah, for sure.
I'd pay money to get the beer to just like hang out with him, and then I would pay for his beer too.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, fair.
Um
I will say,
Go
I
ahead.
will say though, to kind of tie him back to Vince, when he was talking about, and it's a little later in the episode, but like talking about Owen, right? And it's crazy to see like how even after all these years, he'll talk about Owen or some part of his life that featured Owen, where Owen was able to speak to him, and he still gets really welled up to the point where he has to stop talking, and it just goes to show the effects, in a general sense that trauma has on an individual, whether it's a guy like Vince McMahon or a guy like Bret Hart. That stuff, it impacts your personality, and it leaves imprints on your brain that are not easy to scrub away. So, it's really something to see. And especially even after you've had all the life experiences that both of those guys have had too, right? Like Bret Hart's been around the world. Bret Hart's met so many people, done so many things in his career, in his life. And to even just go back to one point and feel exactly the way you do about it probably from day one, like it's powerful stuff, and it's a reminder of just like how important it is to like, and some things in life are unavoidable, right? You can't steer away from tragedy in all cases, but it shows like just how impactful even like the small stuff in the end can be too, right? Like just remembering, the good little times with Owen before, tragedy and,
Yeah.
you
So
know,
like so Pierce, just to be clear, because this probably would have been a part that you didn't watch. They didn't actually talk about Owen's death. Um, it was just a segment. It was talking about the aftermath associated to the screw job, where Owen was in the ring with Brett and kind of just like trying to calm him down a little bit. And Brett was recalling that moment, and he was visibly upset, talking about Owen trying to calm him down. So that's the context there.
mm,
Okay.
But are you guys surprised? I want to go back to the beginning here a little bit. Are you guys surprised that Hogan stood up for Vince despite being with WCW at the time, and despite
Nope.
why?
Because Hogan is the biggest Vince fan there ever was.
Even though he stabbed him in the back and went to WCW and took more money.
That's business. He could have lied on the stand and then he would have went to jail. Uh, legal terms over business. You know what I mean?
I don't know that he was telling the truth, technically speaking.
If
even
Brett,
if he didn't even take the stand, he was facing 17 years because they would have come
yeah,
after him.
For what?
but
What was the actual
he
thing
had
they were
immunity.
allegedly going, because they didn't talk about what they were going after Hogan for. They just said, oh, they had enough stuff to put him away for 17 years. But do you guys know what it was? Because they didn't say what it was.
For distributing steroids
So
and whatnot.
they were allegedly going to try and say that Hogan distributed steroids to others.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and then he got to be the star witness, right?
Yeah.
But because he got immunity
Yeah.
specifically.
He did.
Right.
He did
Yep.
the old face turn on the stand.
But I'm not surprised he would have, essentially been a character witness for Vince.
Yeah. The government probably should have thought that one through a little bit better.
Yeah, but I mean, it's the government. What do you expect? You're
Yeah, not exactly
you're Canadian. You don't know American politics. Besides what our former president says on Twitter.
So
You can't. No one in the federal government's ever been renowned for their competence. We'll just say it that
yeah,
way.
no, I think that's pretty global too. I don't think that's just restricted to the United States, but nevertheless, so they have the court proceedings there, and then we Okay, we get into WWF having low ticket sales and trying to lead with Brett and it not really working all that well.
So let's be honest. It's not Brett's fault. 1994, 1995, 1996 are some of the worst years in WWF history because creatively they were really bad.
Yes.
Creatively it didn't get that bad till the late 2010s, you know. And they had characters like Mantar and the guy from Max Moon from Mars or whatever. Like they kept going. Like they were getting so PG. It was like they were becoming essentially just bad. Like the best character from that era was Doink the Clown, you know, when he was a heel, and then they turned him face and they made him a joke. Doink the Clown is a heel that could have really worked as a bad guy, as a psychotic clown, and then they just were like, well, how about we turn your face? And now you got Doink, Dink, Pink, Blink, Brink, you know,
Like
versus
Pac-Man Ghost.
It was Doink and Dink.
yeah, but then they had 1994 Survivor Series, I think it was, with you know, them versus Jerry the King Lawler and his knights of Sleazy, Peasy, and Jeezy or whatever they were.
Are these dudes in body socks, or is that a different match I'm thinking about?
Probably a different one. It might be the same one, honestly. I will never go back and watch it.
Wasn't exactly one of their strongest showings in that era.
And it didn't help that you had essentially, you know, from the archive footage of Ted Turner sounding like a proto Tony Khan of just being like, yeah, let's do that. I'm okay with it. That works. This is fun.
Yeah.
Eric Bischoff, even though, you know, you want to talk about smelling your own farts, he went to the NWO well just a few too many times, and the Hulk Hogan well way too many times. He was ahead of the game with his idea, you know. Raw was taped, he went live. Raw had all these characters, he wanted realism, and it made the difference.
Well, it's funny too, just drawing all the comparisons, even in a contemporary sense too. And you look at, you know, the philosophy of the booking and say like in AEW, well, even in TNA at the time too. You know, TNA offered a lot of, you know, what you consider an alternative. I mean, and this is ironically prior to Bischoff and Hogan getting involved, right? Where and that think about back in hindsight, that was a major irony. But you know, I mean, you had TNA, which was becoming, you know, the bigger alternative, which is, you know, more based in wrestling, and it was developing success on that. And then similar to how WCW did. And then, you know, years later, AEW, now, you know, before WWE gets too comfortable resting in its own laurels, kind of going back to the well to, you know, do things that, for better or worse, like drew them eyes in the past, but maybe didn't gain them the most, I guess, credibility in the eyes of like the hardcore fans. Now you have our AEW pandering to the sickos, right? Like you have AEW pandering to, maybe not pandering, catering, I guess we'll say, as a more
They're the best
colloquial
wrestling.
term. Exactly, and that's been a claim that's been thrown out for decades by multiple alternative companies, and I mean, it's hard to argue, right? Like it's interesting. We've seen so many like reincarnations or avatars of that basic spirit of like kind of a WCW or, you know, like the alternative to the monolith of the WWF, like where you've had Vince's vision, and then it's almost like Vince Senior's ghost really kind of coming back to haunt in a way. Because I mean, and I go back to something I asked earlier, like, well, what if Vince Senior's philosophies continued on into the modern era? And maybe that is kind of what it is, right? Like it's adaptive to contemporary times, but at the same time, the focus is in ring. It's about like putting on matches a little bit more so than developing stories. I don't know. I thought about that just now, and I mean, I'd have to flesh that idea out a little bit more. But sorry, I might have gone on a little bit of a tangent there, but
see a version of this world where the National Wrestling Alliance was well and true, where they had a true traveling world champion, and going to different territories to defend the title that was the head title of the National Wrestling Alliance, where they had a board and a committee and everything. That would be interesting to see.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I'm not a traditionalist as much in that sense. I don't know. It's hard to say. And in theory, it could work. In execution, it's a lot harder to know for sure. But um, I don't. I can't really add much more to it than that. Um, they talked about next the curtain call. Scott Hall, Kevin Nash's last day on WWF television or work before going to WCW, and how that was the death of kayfabe. And again, this is something that's not new to known wrestling fans. Do you guys have any opinions on that being brought up for the 26th time?
No.
I mean, I feel like it was attested to that people kind of knew kayfabe was dead, or at least it was dying. And again, for better and for worse. And there's a couple different ways it could have gone too, right? Like it could have completely shut the business down. Fortunately, it didn't. Fortunately, it's evolved into this thing that we have nowadays where, people know it's fake and you can only really play the character so much. But I think you're starting to see kind of like a healthy balance between what's real and what's portrayed. I think they're really going down that branch of kind of that hybrid, and I think it's going to create a lot of success in this particular era. So I mean, right, like like a lot of other things, like who's to say where it could have gone in various number of universes, but in this universe, I feel like ultimately it was a positive, it was a net positive for the business.
Yep. Yeah, I would agree. I mean, um, it was again a case of them being stuck in the past and needing that realization that it's not really that serious. You can move on and show some humanity while still doing your job. But
Right. I did think it was really funny though. Did you guys catch when they were talking about someone going into Vince's office, and I'm trying to think if it was. I think yeah, it was during the curtain call portion of the show where they showed not far from the ladies' locker room, mind you, the sign for Vince's office or Vince's whatever, and it was it was this picture of a guy in a chariot with multiple horses up front and hoplites behind him. Oh, it was. If there was any depiction of Vince that he saw himself as, probably at that point in time, that would have been it.
yeah, Vince's
This
office and the
Julius
women's change
Caesar.
room was in the same spot too. That there was some irony there, but yeah, that was
Go
the
figure, right?
weird thing that I
That's never know.
like. It probably was the same room, knowing Vince back then, but
Yeah,
Knowing Vince now.
they do interviews. You can't get over the sound of running water. Chitter chatter.
Um, but yeah, that part tied into a bit of glamorizing on WCW. I got to see Eric Bischoff talk about his podcast again. Fuck's sakes.
Did you notice that Triple H used the old rumor and innuendo line that Conrad Thompson likes to throw out there every now and again?
I did not
I
draw
thought that
that
was kind of funny.
parallel, but that's funny.
That was just a me thing then, I guess. But yeah, I was like, rumor and innuendo. I'm like, oh, huh.
Speaking
What?
of, the 83 weeks and everything, when Scott Hall and Kevin Nash went over to WCW, or essentially, Scott Hall was portraying Razor Ramon, but as Scott Hall, and Vince sued them for intellectual property for doing the exact same thing that he did in the 80s.
Well, that was the
And then
irony
being like,
piece, right? That
he's
was
like,
the
oh,
whole
it's different.
that.
It's
Yeah,
like,
but that's because Marta and I were watching it together, and she had that same thing like, "Oh, he's a hypocrite. He's a hypocrite." I'm like, no, he's like the thing that he said. We'd already talked about it in episode 1, where he's like, "You're seeing the Vince that he wants you to see." I think that's all that lawsuit was that he, by the way that he was talking about like the hypocrisy associated to it when he was getting that line of questioning. He didn't outright say it, but the vibe that I got was he was acknowledging that he really didn't have a problem with what they were doing because he knew he had done it to others, but he had to put out the perception that he had a problem with it. And that's why he went through the circus that he did.
Because and yeah, I agree with that, but it literally is the exact same thing he did, because you look at the characters that he stole, where it was like 3 or 4 biggest guys from each promotion. Guess what? They portrayed the exact same character they were portraying in those territories in the WWF.
Yep, they absolutely did. They absolutely did, and he knew he was behind at that point. He knew he was going to be on the back foot compared to um, the budget that Ted Turner had and the amount of money that he was putting out. And he felt the need to try and evoke a sympathy card and try and play a victim in all of this. And
Vince was never going to be the victim.
Got to be the underdog babyface in the public eye.
I mean, I would argue Pierce at that point, even though he had come off the tail of the steroid thing, but he was found technically not guilty for. I think it was probably the right thing to try to do if you knew you couldn't outright compete with that, but still just try and put it out there. It's like, hey, they're just going to do the same stuff that we did, but we did it first. You should, stay tuned to us instead of those thieves, I don't know. Like, how else do you play it? But we don't get into what happens afterwards. Like, well, episode 4 will cover that stuff, so I don't want to really get into the Attitude Era. But like in those initial moments, like, what do you do? What do you do when they're taking the guys that literally are the reason why you have to keep the lights on, right? They took Hogan, they took Savage, they took others, right? Like the first episode of Nitro, they took Lex Luger, who, admittedly wasn't what he needed to be in WWE or what they wanted him to be in WWE, but he was still a significant name. They took
Lex Luger is, he's similar to Hulk Hogan, but Luger was always better as a heel than as a baby face,
Yeah. They took Scott Hall and Kevin Nash. The Bret Hart stuff was interesting, and how Vince actually showed him the loopholes in the contract to get him to sign with WCW, so he didn't have to pay him because he couldn't afford to pay him because he was losing money due to the poor performing product.
Well, and it's funny too, because wasn't there a part where Vince was kicking himself because, ironically enough, he wasn't building new stars. He had to go back to the well to rely on a guy like Bret, who probably resembled more of a guy like Bob Backlund than a Hogan. Like he was.
That's not Vince's guy. It's not a guy that you can. As much as we want to talk about how good of a man Bret Hart is and how good of a wrestler he is, he's not the larger than life character that WWF at the time had, and since then too, has been most successful with. Right. There's nothing special about him outside that he's a good hand in the ring.
Well, he was such like a stern departure from what Hogan was. And it's ironic too, because that kind of portrayal was the exact thing that Vince was trying to get away from in the first place when he took the belt off of Backlund to put it onto Sheik. And now, like, what are you going to do with a guy like Bret? You dump all this money into him to try and like keep him around because he's your stalwart. He's the guy who, and Bret had said it too.
Rely on, right? He's the guy you can rely on.
Bret did so fucking much for Vince. Similar to like how, Shawn, we'll segue into Shawn Michaels in a little bit here too, but Shawn, like Bret, both had very close relationship with Vince. Both would do anything for Vince. Both had already done so much for Vince. Bret, I would say, was like, if you're talking about character, I would say Bret would be, the more reliable example of the two. The guy who you could actually, if you got a horse in a race, I would bet on Bret more than I'd ever bet on Shawn, just for the sake of his consistency and of his character. But he's not. he's good, right? He's a good hand. He's not a great hand. Consistency is fine, but consistency doesn't create cash for you.
It doesn't put asses in the seats.
It doesn't. It puts the same asses in the seats, but it doesn't draw new asses to your seats.
You could
It
argue
doesn't
that
draw new
that's,
eyes.
yeah, I would argue that that's what you're seeing in current day AEW product, right? The same thing where it's like it's the lack of the larger than life character that's allowing them to continue to grow, right? They've plateaued, they've dropped off because there's not enough to keep people engaged. Ring work only does so much. And again, we're going back to that Meltzer quote of him acknowledging it. That's even more hilarious because again, we're talking about that point. But
Right.
yeah,
And I mean, but that's the thing too. Like in this era, I mean, MJF is about as good as you can get, right? And they're not wrong for throwing the bank at him. Because I mean, right, like it. But to your point, they don't have a Roman Reigns, right? Because you have guys like, and you could argue too, like look at kind of like a parallel situation with Cody Rhodes. Like he is the champion. He is the guy who arguably you could put all, the faith in the world behind and trust him to lead the company. And he would. He's got the character. He's got the temperament for it. But at the end of the day, he's not Roman Reigns. Roman Reigns is more of that larger than life portrayal, kind of the same way like Hogan was compared to Hart. And you look at WrestleMania 9 as a perfect example of that. And that'll be, and that's a slight tangent, but when you look at the archetypes, right, of who Hogan was to the industry versus who Bret Hart was, when you, at the end of the day, make a call to bring out Hogan out of who already had a tag match earlier in the night, and you bring him out, and Bret Hart is supposed to be one of like your guys going forward, you have him lose the title only to have Hogan come in and for no other reason other than to fucking do it, just come in and say, I'm going to challenge you for the title to Yokozuna and then beat Yokozuna and be the one who's standing tall at the end of the night after Bret got made to look like shit. Like that kind of tells you really all you need to know. And granted too, like, I mean, but you could also say like, well, Hogan was, and this was true in WCW too. That's why they had to flip him, which is coincidentally and ironically something that Vince said he never even considered doing with Hogan. But another what if, like, could you imagine if like Hogan would have stuck around in the WWF and Vince would have actually pulled the plug, say after like the Yokozuna moment, like shitting on Bret Hart, for instance, like, oh, you're not, kind of like how Cena was doing to Roman, like you can't get the job done. And then that lights something under him. Weird parallel storylines, right? But I mean, to the point, right? Like the larger than life characters, they don't have those in AEW. They do with what they can, but they don't have that. And when you look at, like Hogan, oh shoot, where was I going? Where were we going with that?
come on, you've been going and going. So
Yeah, I know. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. It's the 10th episode. Damn it.
yeah, is it the trains in the station?
True to form. True to form. Sorry.
Pierce, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Since we're on the topic of, because this is about the screw job, Meltzer said it, I know Donnie, but one thing that wasn't brought up in this episode that I've heard, that was brought up in the Dark Side of the Ring, is that for when the screw job happened, it was Bret in Canada losing to Shawn Michaels, right?
Yep.
And they had real heat. They did not like each other.
Yep.
One of the things in Bret's contract was understandable creative control of his character, and it made sense that he did not want to lose the title to a man who consistently disrespected, and they had real life fights, and so that's part of the reason why
reasonable
Bret said
creative control. Okay, so here's the thing, right? Survivor Series was in, and again, I don't want to be shitting on Bret. I don't think I'm allowed to as a Canadian citizen, but nevertheless, Survivor Series was
you're
in
allowed to have the wee woo wagon on you.
Survivor Series was in November, right?
Right.
And his contract was done December 1st. So while he could have retained or had some Originally Bruce Pritchard was under the perception it was going to just be a whack job finish and no actual result would be determined. There was no real better opportunity to take the belt. Like he's talking about doing it at MSG, but that wasn't a pay-per-view at MSG. That was, I don't even know if that was a Raw. That might have just been a show that they had it at Madison Square Gardens. Like Survivor Series
Kevin
was
Nash.
still one of your high profile, like it was still a big four back then because there wasn't anything else they had In Your House back then, right?
Right, but you can make that argument, but 2 years before at an MSG house show, Kevin Nash beat Bob Backlund for the title.
Yeah, that's Bob
8
Backlund.
seconds.
That's Bob Backlund. We
Yeah,
already
but
know
you could
Vince's
have
thoughts
him
on Bob
lose it
Backlund.
to Shawn or lose it to somebody else on a house show. It didn't happen often, but they could have done it. And, a reasonable creative control with how Shawn Michaels was shooting on him about sunny days and everything.
I don't know if reasonable creative control can be determined when your last big show prior to your contract expiring, you don't want to give up your title. I don't know that that's reasonable.
It's reasonable for the real life heat that they had.
That's all subjective.
And then also too, Vince had a point. Like, I mean, the title is his property, right? Like ultimately it's Vince who owns it. It's Vince who determines who it goes to. And you could argue, right, Brett being who he was to Vince and being what he was to the industry, you could argue that Brett was the champion and he would always be recognized as such. And maybe there was some, you could argue that he was always the champion, right? But he can't take the belt with him because then who's gonna, when you look at what Medusa did, right? Like you're gonna be, it was one thing that Vince's ghost kind of came back to haunt him with what he did to Wendy Richter, and he faced a similar situation with Brett. But like after what's going on with WCW and all this stuff, like you're not going to ever take the risk of something even remotely close to that. You're not going to have your belt ever show up on the opposite program.
That's the main title. It's not the intercontinental title. It's not I don't know if the European Championship was that thing.
Big gold to WWF. It happened the other way around.
That was after it was already bought.
The NWA title, actually, with Dan Severn too. Well, I think WWF was in a weird spot. There's like a weird little pocket where they weren't as competitive, I guess. Everybody kind of had their own spot because you did see some interesting stuff. Like the NWA Championship did make its way onto the World Wrestling Federation's program too. I don't know. And then ECW also came in, but it was kind of, wasn't in a way.
It was always a secondary title the way the ECW title was presented on WWE television. Like when they had Undertaker decide who he wanted to, go up against at WrestleMania, like, he was never picking Bobby Lashley, right?
Could you imagine if he did?
Oh my God.
I would like that timeline.
But anyways, like, I agree to disagree on that one, but I don't know if Brett was as entitled to his stance as he was. Personal stuff be damned. Shawn was a piece of shit back then. Brett was probably a lot more reasonable. Vince's title, it's Vince's business.
Why I brought up the creative control. It's apparently in the Dark Side of the Ring episode, he went up to Shawn and he's like, I will always take care of you in the ring. And he said, I respect that, but Brett, I cannot say the same back to you. And that's apparently what was the driving force of Brett saying, I'm not doing the job.
Interesting. And that was basically the end of the episode, was the fallout of the Montreal Screwjob. And they segued it into talking about how Vince would vilify that perception of him in the future, and that was the end of the episode. So,
without the Montreal Screwjob, you do not get the character of Mr. McMahon.
So, nope, you don't.
But and talk about it to death, and we should stop talking about it.
Yeah, I don't want to get into that part of it because that's going to eat into our stuff for next week. So I don't want to talk about any Attitude Era related stuff or anything like that until we get there.
Can I bring up a neat point about the curtain call? One last little thing, and it's relevant.
Yeah, because
Well, they talked about right how Triple H ultimately, and Triple H was made to be kind of like a scapegoat in a lot of these instances, right? Like the screw job included, right?
He
Like
was the
Hunter
Jack
is.
Perry. Did he drive a van around afterwards?
I mean, he did drive a tank,
I
but
mean, he
that's
doesn't
next week's
drink, so
podcast.
he doesn't drive
That's
anything
a lot
slick.
more badass than a minivan, and he looked a
I
lot
would
more
agree to
badass
that.
than Jack Perry. But sorry, go on.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. No, I thought it was interesting because um, Triple H, for his role in the curtain call, was the guy to take the heat for that incident, right? And they stated as much. So allegedly, he was supposed to win King of the Ring in 1996, and that year, who won King of the Ring? Do either of you guys know?
Was it Mabel?
1996.
Austin 316 says I just whipped your
Oh, it was
ass.
Austin.
Oh hell yeah!
I wasn't sure if it was him or if it was Mabel. I know it was around that timeline, but
Mabel was the
Yep,
year before, and let's not talk about it.
yeah.
it was the all-time moment of Austin 316. It was the Stone Cold Steve Austin character being born as a result of Triple H's scapegoatedness. And where did this 1996 King of the Ring event occur? As it happens, it happened in the Mecca Arena, now called the UW Panther Arena in Milwaukee, Wisconsin,
Oh, you
where
fucking serious?
Pierce, we bore witness, as some of you viewers, listeners may be privy to, another character defining moment in Hangman burning down Swerve's house.
Oh God.
So I thought
And
that was
I'm
really
pretty
cool.
sure
I
where
was like,
Vince pissed his pants.
yeah, it's entirely possible. There may be Vince piss still lingering in the Panther Arena.
Because that happened in Milwaukee where they had the Bang 316 gun.
Yeah, yep, it sure did. But yeah, I looked into that and I thought that was really interesting. And it's another one of those instances where, like, right, how much could have gone by the wayside had that moment not occurred? It's a butterfly effect.
Yep. Absolutely.
Yeah.
The curtain call literally led to what is the biggest money line in wrestling history. That is still the most sold shirt of all time.
Yeah.
It is what's saved.
Behind, actually, it's second most behind the Core's diagonal shirt.
I'd love to see the evidence I'd love to see the stats on that one.
Oh yeah.
Give me some numbers, Pierce.
You're not
600
allowed.
million
You almost
to
got us
3.
canceled for arguing stats on merch sales. I saw that bickering contest you got into, hating on Cody for that.
You know,
Yeah.
Christian sold more merch than John Cena in 2005. You know, not everyone else knows that, but I do. That was a big internet argument too, by the way. I don't know if you were privy to that.
You were hating on Cody, and I wouldn't have hated on Cody in that spot.
And
I had my opportunities to
you
hate on
rightfully
Cody.
got called out for it, Brandon.
Yeah, you absolutely did. I'm
Wait,
not
what did I
happy
do?
that the podcast got called out for that, but I am happy that
Wait, what?
you were talking.
What
shit
did I
about
do
Cody.
again?
You were talking shit about Cody being a top 5 merch seller for Fanatics.
I said I didn't understand it. That's all I did. I didn't talk shit. I just said I didn't understand.
This is bullshit.
Yeah.
I did not. That's a little strong.
Hold on. Now, I want to dig it up. I want to dig it up. So,
show me the proofs.
hold on. I got to look in the notifications because I can't really see reply. Actually, maybe I can dig into reply history, but you got shit on.
You should be able to.
Yeah,
because guys like, he just given like these the blasé response points. Oh, he's loved nationally, internationally. I'm saying from an arbitrary point of view, I get like the story, Dusty, son of a plumber, all that kind of stuff, right? The Rhodes family dynasty, et cetera, et cetera. I get that. I just am like, I feel like some of the numbers, and this is true in all of pro wrestling, as we've discussed on this podcast, particularly this episode, how some of the numbers can be inflated in order to convey an image, in order to, right, like Vince said, right, to tie it all back in, to kind of control public discourse or to control public opinion, direct thought, that sort of thing.
Okay, I got the comment. All right, so I want to chime in here. So the backstage brawl on September 22nd posted, according to Fightful, Cody Rhodes has reached the top 5 overall in sales for any athlete or personality on Fanatics. No other professional wrestler is this high on the list. Congrats to the American Nightmare. Hashtag Cody Rhodes. Hashtag WWE. This got a reply from Ope-Eh Three-Way Wrestling Podcast, but Brandon did put his signature in the comment saying,
Sure.
Me and Donnie do not condone this.
no, not at all. He said, A, which is, you're already stealing my line, but okay.
Well, he meant
It's
continue.
spelled the same way. Something
Right,
tells me some numbers are getting cooked. I don't know how Cody Rhodes would have that kind of appeal.
That is what I said, yes.
Replies
I own that.
included because he's one of the best. It's crap
Ergo.
like this. Sorry.
Bullshit.
Stephen Burke said because he's one of the best. Okay.
Right,
William
again.
Berg, let me finish some of these comments here. William Berg says, it's crap like this that is wrong with the world. Quote, I don't like it, so it's got to be fake. End quote. His appeal is evidence, is poorly written, in the draw international and domestic, he's money. Okay. Which you then replied, is it him or is it his song?
I think Cody's song is about as over as he is, kind of like with Seth. That's my personal take on it.
Mike Carter commented, because people like Cody Rhodes goofy, don't let the internet fool you. Mm-hmm. And then another one.
You could argue people like all sorts of people in the wrestling business. I like Austin Theory, but
can we not go one show without bringing up Austin Theory?
Sorry, that was my fault this time.
Oh, God.
Okay, never mind. Carry on. Carry on.
Nice guy. But yeah, no, like we in this house we own 4 pieces of Cody merch in this house.
I've got a piece of Cody merch.
WWE Cody merch.
Yeah, it's the shirt that they sold at Mania, which was the tail of the tape.
Yeah. Brandon, do you own any Cody merch?
I cannot say that I own any Cody merch. No, I don't. Again, I don't dislike Cody at all. It's not a knock on Cody at all. He just doesn't have the right. He's not like
Cody.
I just don't get it. That's it. That's all. I just don't. I don't think.
Here, Brandon, I'll spell it out to you. It's very easy. Kids.
Yep. And apparently,
how many times did we hear that theme song at WWE World?
A lot, like 80% of the time.
How many of them were
FanFest?
How many of them were kids?
So Fanatics FanFest that they did in the summer in August. Yeah, if you watched clips of it, like they were doing like interviews, and this is not WWE related stuff, but this you have like they're interviewing Derek Jeter, or they're interviewing Tom Brady, or you see some guy selling something at his merch stand talking about the experience. And what's the music you hear in the background? It's Cody Rhodes music. Like, it's crazy the amount of people that are into Cody. Like, people love the American
his
Nightmare.
Song.
It goes all with it though. Like,
is he greater than the sum of his parts though? That's like the question I asked myself.
He is a golden boy. Like, he is a guy who, like, I'll give, like, I'm an okay fan of him. I'm not a huge fan of Cody's. I like parts of him. I don't like parts of him, but that's a different show for a different time. But speaking to specifically about a casual fan like Marta, who is Cody Rhodes is her favorite wrestler, right? And it's because she thinks that he is just a good human being that can't do any wrong and is a good role model for fans, and someone who it's like, man, this guy is like the gold standard of what a person should be on this platform.
She never saw him in AEW, did she?
Nope. And I don't want to taint her vision of that. But
just show her the Anthony Ogogo storyline, and she'll be like, yeah.
She already doesn't like AEW. She finds it too gratuitous. So I don't think that's going to help the cause in ever getting her out to another AEW show. She did go to Collision once, but yeah, that's like, I think that's common. I think that idea is common across the Cody fan base. And those are the people that are buying shirts. Like, we get in, I'm going to go on a tangent here. I see these accounts on social media that talk their shit about not liking certain things. So, like, I'll give an example of Wrestling Humble or Humble Wrestling or whatever the fuck he is. He's a pretty big account on the Twitter side of wrestling fandom. And the report came out of Alexa Bliss is coming back soon. And there was that people were speculating on Monday Night Raw. There was even a tease of her with there being what appeared to maybe have been a Lily doll behind Liv Morgan in this backstage segment she had with Dom after the opening. And he's like, well, nobody wants to see her come back that way. And it's like, well, who the fuck are you to just because you're some guy on Twitter that has a bunch of followers to say that nobody wants to see that version of this person come back, right? Like,
It's like that PD from New York guy. That guy's the fucking worst, man.
he's got some really bad opinions recently. He's got some good ones from time to time, but he's got some really bad ones too. And it's like, why are these people the oracle of what people should think? We can draw our own conclusions on what we think about this person. I'm not hating. I'm deviating away from you on your thing on Cody Rhodes and more into like toxic fandom, and kind of telling people what they should and shouldn't like, because I think that's a load of crap. I think people can make their own decisions on what they like or don't like and have their reasons for it. And if you don't agree with those reasons, that's your prerogative. But that doesn't mean they're wrong. If it's rooted in like, I don't like gore, so I don't watch AEW because it's too gory. I don't like WWE because I don't think the talent does enough work, like comparatively to the ring work that they do in AEW or whatever. Right? That stuff is like subjective, but it's still understandable, right? But like, oh, sure. Nobody liked Dark Alexa Bliss, so nobody wants to see this. Like, shut the fuck up. I don't know. And I see it all the time. You see it with JD. JD's constantly shitting on AEW now, which some of it's warranted, but some of it's not. Like he was hating on this feud with Daniel Bryan and fuck, his name just flew out of my head.
Nigel McGuinness.
Thank you. And it's just like it's something that people want to see. The people that are it's being catered to, it's something that they want to see. So like, it's not for me. I don't really care too much for that technical style. I don't care too much about a guy who's been on the commentary stand for 10 years being a wrestler. I didn't watch him when he was a wrestler. So like, forgive my lack of care to that. But the people that did grow up with that, like you guys, and do want to see it, were probably satisfied with what you watch, and that's fine.
Even if it was slow paced, like, I mean, just to see it, you know. So, I mean, yeah, to your point about Cody, like, I mean, after you bring that into consideration, like, I guess that's where, like, I kind of became rooted in my own rhetoric when it's with stuff. Like, I mean, right, like, you bring up a good point. Like, there are people who just want to see, like, heroes, right? And there's a considerable deficit of that in society today. So, I mean, I get that. And it's good to see, I get, you know, the value of a paragon of virtue, right? Like someone who can be the face in spite of things or what have you, and, you know, on top of everything else. But yeah, I guess just for like clarification, like I didn't want to make it come off like I was like hating on Cody Rhodes. I guess when you explain it, it makes a lot more. When you explain it, it definitely makes a lot more sense. No, and I can appreciate that perspective.
Yeah, you've never put it out there that you dislike Cody Rhodes. So I don't think that was the case. But yeah,
however,
when you actually like conceptualize
that did not help.
Well, wait, what's that?
He said that you didn't put it out there that you hated Cody Rhodes, but unfortunately, that comment did not help that.
No, it didn't.
Well, no,
it didn't.
But that's a misinterpretation. Like my point had been prior to that. It's just like I didn't fully understand like where the appeal came from, because I guess like as I've kind of gotten older, like I've kind of appreciated more of like, I don't know, like I never really was behind like the bigger babyface characters, I guess in general, even like.
Sure. Yeah, I get that.
I mean, Pierce, you said you're a John Cena fan, right? Like John Cena was like.
I mean, the reason that Cody, I think, resonates with adults just as much as he does kids. I mean, John Cena and Roman Reigns they were more for kids because they were Superman. The reason why Cody resonates with adults is because of his story. He legit bet on himself.
Oh, here
He
we go
could have
again.
fucking failed. Legitimately, he could have tripped and fell on his face as soon as he left WWE. But he succeeded, and that's why he resonates with me, because I've had to go out on my own a few times. And did it work as well as I wanted to? No, but it still worked. With Cody, it worked as best as it could have been.
Yep.
Yeah.
And yeah, like it's those like socially positive paragons. Like before the rise of Rhea Ripley, and even still, you can see it in a lot. Who's the most female representation you see in the crowd? It's Bianca Belair, right? Like there's so many girl. Like I go to a lot of WWE shows. Every time they're in Toronto, I go. I've traveled all across North America to see different shows. I'm lucky that I've been able to do that in the last couple of years. Before the rise of Rhea Ripley in the last year and a bit, unequivocally the most representation for female fandom, like in youth, Bianca Belair, and it's not close. Like so many girls have the braid and do the dance, and like wear the clothing, and it's like that's a significant like. Those are the people that are buying merch, because it's you buy merch for your as a parent, you buy merch for your kid who is really interested in this person, and then you want them to feel like they're doing you are supporting what they like, so you buy a shirt for yourself too, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's like you get like 2-for-1 deal almost at that point, because you buy one for your kid, and it's like, well, I want my kid to I want them to know that like they're doing the right thing, or like I support their interest or whatever, so you buy the shirt too. And they're not just selling one, they're selling two. And then once they sell two, they sell a belt, maybe they sell whatever else paraphernalia, a picture, an autographed picture. He signs pictures before every show. They're $20, and you get an autograph, 8x10 of Cody. Like that's pretty cool to have. So it's stuff like that. It adds up real quick when you're going around 2-3 times a week to different places. Maybe less so now they're not doing as many house shows. But anyways, I didn't mean to beat you up on that, but like,
No,
I did.
Fair enough. I mean, hey,
man.
right.
I think we're hitting the longest episode that we've had for the show, which is not a bad thing, because I'm having a good time tonight talking about some stuff that we've been talking about. I would be remiss.
It's our 10th episode.
To not talk about one more thing on the show tonight. And I said it was the first word that I said on the podcast tonight, and I want to bring it up to you guys.
Yeet.
Yeet.
That was a shock, and I think that was one of the best booking decisions Triple H has made.
I was shocked as well. Marta went to bed beforehand, and I was like, she's like, oh, it's Jay and Braun for the main event. I'm like, yeah, you're not going to miss much. Braun's going to win.
I'm not going to lie. I thought you were going to lead into Marta's pregnant.
Oh, no.
It was kind of giving the vibe.
No.
You said it's the first word I saw in the part. I thought you were going to say, and then you're like, it was the first word I saw in the podcast, and I'm like, okay, I get it.
Yeah. Yeet.
Okay. Yeet, ski.
Like I
Marta's
said.
pregnant.
Wow. No, that is
fucking left turn you took, Brandon.
I don't know. You know what? Never forget what I say. It's fine.
Like, oh.
Yeet, skeet. Like there's 2 degrees of separation. There you go. I don't know.
Oh boy.
Disregard what I say. It's late in the night.
She's gonna be like, "What the fuck?" She listens back to the episodes, and she's gonna listen to this, and she'll be like, "What the fuck?" No, but
happy birthday, Marta.
Yeah, happy birthday to Marta. She had her 19th birthday again.
Happy birthday, Marta.
Yesterday.
Wonderful.
I'm not saying how many times she's had her 19th birthday, but so now he's the 19th.
Never have your 19th. Never too many times.
So, but yeah, Jey Uso, big surprise, new Intercontinental Champion.
Well deserved too.
Curious to see what happens next. Do they give Braun a rematch? Does Braun like? I'm a little bit confused by it, but that makes me even more intrigued on what they do next, because I did not see that coming.
It was a very Vince McMahon booking. You know what I mean?
Crowd loved it.
'Cause
That pop was huge, and Joe Tessitore's call was fantastic.
right, I agree with both those things. One thing I've been seeing on the internet wrestling community is people are like, Jey Uso is this generation's Jeff Hardy. That is incorrect. 2008, Jeff Hardy was the second most loved man in America besides Barack Obama. Jey Uso is very popular, but the way that Jeff was in '08, he would have been face of the company
I
if he did
think
not have his.
I think Jay's got a little bit to go on that because I mean you see Jeff Hardy's transcended wrestling culture in a lot of ways, where you see like just random memes get brought up about Twist of Fates and Jeff Hardy doing swantons and things like that, and
Hardy
it's
doing
like
the dance while his brother's getting his ass kicked.
yeah, didn't think that was going to come up in things not related to wrestling. So I think that the cultural gap was bridged a lot there with some of Jeff Hardy's work, and I haven't really seen that with Jay's yet. But huge pop,
He, cer- he
huge
certainly
pop.
transcended the work he did with his own brother. I mean, that's the parallel you can certainly most easily draw. Like he is firmly in his own right now, and
Feel bad
I
for Jimmy.
mean, Sky's. Yeah, I don't even know what's going on with Jimmy. Like Rikishi's making me paranoid about whatever the fuck's going on with Jimmy. I don't know if there's been any light shed on that.
I think they're just waiting for the right creative time to bring him in. But I mean, I've heard chatter on speculation that the with him with Jay winning now the IC title, it might not be them involved in the War Games match at Survivor Series. It could just be um, Kevin and Randy.
Oh God.
I doubt it.
They still got to tie
Well,
the ends together, and the ends are a little bit closer still. For I feel they pulled the trigger on Kevin before then, but maybe they don't.
we'll see what happens.
But that's it's a long episode we had today. Thanks guys for coming out on a Thursday, shooting the shit about Vince and whatnot. We're gonna do the same again next week. Also next week we're going to try and cover the Bad Blood card predictions with Bad Blood. Bad Blood's looking real good. Gonna say that.
Really good.
So
yeah, we're gonna see. We're gonna see
Did
a
they
lot.
did they figure out what the main event is yet? They were still talking about what was going to main event.
I would be very
It's gotta be.
surprised that Roman and Cody don't main event, despite everyone having their opinion that it should be Drew and Punk, which I get. But having Roman's first match back, not main event, I don't know.
Yeah, that'd
What
be tough. That's a really tough call.
it is tough. I think that both can work. I think if you have a traditional ending in the tag match and don't have anything come out of it, that probably shouldn't be the end of the show. But
Right.
There's gonna be shenanigans, so I would expect that to open and then Punk and Drew to close. But again, I'm a Punk mark, so you know me.
I think it depends on how big of a spot do you have in that Cody match that warrants whether it should be first or last. We'll see. Follow us on socials. Again, if you want to see all the hilarious commentary that Brandon's been leaving on our Facebook, follow Ope Three-Way on Facebook. Hopefully he doesn't get us canceled by this time next week. And follow on X. We'll post on stuff on there too when we can. I want to get more into the live tweeting again. It's just I haven't had the most time to watch everything live. But I want to get onto live tweeting, especially with the PL. I think I'm going to watch Bad Blood live, so I'll try and get live tweeting and reactions and stuff on X.
It is starting an hour earlier because it's the first time that a UFC pay-per-view and a WWE pay-per-view are on the same day. So it's starting an hour earlier so they don't get wires crossed there.
That makes sense.
Yep, gotta maximize those margins.
You guys have anything else you want to bring up, pitch, talk about before we sign out?
I got
No,
nothing.
yeah. I mean, we also got to consider next week too. We got how are we going to fit in the 5th anniversary of Dynamite? Because that's something to talk about next week too.
We'll give a
But, I
top
mean,
five or top five
yeah,
moments.
there's a lot. I
Donnie
mean,
will give
this.
his top five dishonorable moments.
Oh yeah, I'll definitely do the top 5 duds. That is very exciting. I'm looking forward to. Now, are we sticking just to Dynamite, or are we talking about AEW as a whole? I guess we got to stick with Dynamite, right?
Dynamite.
I'd say Dynamite in the event of
Man, I don't
this.
get the
Yeah.
exploding barbed wire match. What a shit show that was. Do I get
As
Jericho falling through the diamond plate, or was that on Rampage?
No, that was Dynamite.
Yes. Okay, that was definitely a really bad
You could
spot.
talk about Anthony Ogogo and Cody's weigh-in.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, I got some stuff.
yeah, I was about to tie it into Vince and say, well, Donnie, life's not fair, as Vince has said numerous times, and that's something we'll call back to again on the next week's episode, because that will, I'm sure, come up again. But
No, I'm gonna
next
have a
week is
good
looking.
top 5 worst moments in Dynamite.
And
Next week is looking to be a good
top
time.
5 best, and Brandon will have his top 5 best. Or maybe Brandon, you want to go top 5 most mediocre moments?
Ooh, most mediocre. Damn.
Donnie's got the bad, I've got the good, you've got the medium.
As opposed to least mediocre.
Well,
it'll be a good time next week. We'll figure it out, but it's going to be. I'm
Now
excited
we're
for
holding
it. There's a lot
ourselves up
going
to
on.
these things. Yeah, now we gotta get it done. Okay.
absolutely.
Yeah, let's get her done, boys.
Who wants to sign us out? Pierce?
I think it's got to be me. It's only been me so far,
Yeah.
boys. Maybe we'll switch it up soon. But as for today, thanks for stopping into the Ope-Eh Three-Way. Have a beer on us. Thanks for listening.